You've been told that feeling lost means something's wrong with you, that you're behind, broken, falling apart, that you should have it all figured out by now, a clear path, a purpose. But if that were true, why do even the strongest people feel empty at night? Why do you lie in bed sometimes, staring at the ceiling, mind racing, wondering what the point of it all is? The truth is, feeling lost isn't a failure. It's the first step. The doorway. The crack in the illusion that life is supposed to be perfectly mapped out. Buddhist wisdom doesn't tell you to fix yourself. It shows you how to let go of pressure, of judgment, of the constant need to get somewhere. Tonight, you're not going to push those thoughts away. You're going to see through them. You're going to learn that emptiness isn't scary. It's peaceful, still, free. The Buddha taught that when we stop clinging, stop resisting, our minds become like a calm lake, clear, quiet, deep. And as you listen tonight, something will shift. The tight grip in your chest will ease. The noise in your head will soften, and you'll feel it. That maybe, just maybe, being lost is exactly where you're meant to be. This isn't just a sleep story. It's a release, a quiet returning to yourself. So if you're ready to stop fighting the fog and start resting in it, let's begin. You've been taught to fear not knowing, to panic when answers don't come, to believe that uncertainty is weakness and confusion is a problem to be solved. But what if that tension in your chest isn't something to fix? What if the space where nothing feels clear is actually the beginning of something important? Not a dead end, but a doorway. A quiet signal that you've outgrown old beliefs and something deeper is trying to break through. Tonight, we're going to walk straight into that space. Not to escape it, but to rest inside it. Because in Zen, not knowing isn't a failure. It's sacred. It's where the mind softens and something wiser begins to speak. When you stop needing all the answers, something inside begins to breathe again. That pressure to always get it right starts to loosen its grip. And in its place, a quiet presence arises. The beginner's mind. In Zen, they call it Shoshin, a state where you are open, curious, and willing to see the world, not through the filters of past knowledge, but with fresh eyes. Most people spend their lives collecting certainty like trophies. But the more we try to define everything, the more boxed in we feel. We become full, too full to learn, too full to listen. Zen invites us to empty the cup, to let go of being the expert, the one who always knows. Because when your mind is full, there's no room for truth to enter. But when you say, "I don't know," with honesty, not defeat, suddenly there's space. And in that space, life moves again. The beginner's mind isn't naive. It's not pretending to be clueless. It's a powerful stance of humility. A recognition that the universe is too vast, too alive to be fully grasped by thought alone. It's the willingness to admit, I don't know what will happen next. I don't know who I'm becoming. I don't know what this moment means. And that's okay. Because right here, in this not knowing, I am awake. I am listening. This attitude creates a different kind of intelligence, one that is responsive rather than reactive, a mind that listens before it decides. that notices what is rather than chasing what should be. This is why Zen practice often seems so paradoxical. The teachings don't hand you answers, they hand you presence. A quiet challenge. Stay with what is unresolved. Breathe through what feels unfinished. Do not rush to conclusions. In that space, something ancient stirs. And yet, this can feel so uncomfortable at first. The mind protests. It wants structure, clarity, a map. But in Zen, the map is burned. There's only the step you're taking now. Each moment, a path unfolding under your feet. And strangely, once you accept that you're walking without a map, you begin to see more clearly. Your eyes open wider, your ears become sharper, every detail comes alive because you're no longer looking for something else. You're right here. In beginner's mind, problems shift shape. You stop trying to fix everything and start to observe. What is this anxiety, really? What is this sadness asking for? You start to see how much of your suffering comes not from reality, but from the mind's need to label, solve, and control. The beginner's mind doesn't fight what is, it rests with it. It becomes intimate with it. It studies the storm without trying to change the weather. This way of being isn't passive, it's spacious. And in that space, things evolve naturally. Have you ever noticed how, when you stop forcing a solution, clarity often arises on its own? That's the intelligence of not knowing, the insight that blooms when you're no longer choking the moment with analysis. The beauty of Zen is that it teaches you to trust the unfolding, not because you have control, but because you've surrendered the illusion of needing it. There's a deep gentleness in this practice, a kind of respect for life's mystery. You stop interrogating the world like a courtroom witness. You start approaching it like a poem. There's no need to decode everything, no pressure to extract meaning from every feeling. Sometimes it's enough to simply feel, to let things be unclear, to let life speak in silence and space. This doesn't mean you lose your intelligence. In fact, your awareness sharpens, but your relationship with thinking changes. You stop believing every thought. You stop chasing certainty like a drug. And slowly, the mind that once felt like a prison becomes a garden. Ideas can come and go, emotions can rise and pass, and you, your true self, remain still beneath it all, watching, breathing, being. This is the fertile ground Zen speaks of. The don't know mind is not a void, it's a seedbed, an open field where possibility lives. When you're no longer caught in rigid ideas of who you are or what your life should be, something new can begin to grow. Insight doesn't come from stacking more thoughts on top of each other. It comes from dissolving the ones that no longer serve you, from standing quietly at the edge of your knowing and allowing the unknown to guide you. Zen koans are built on this principle. They're not riddles to solve, they're tools to break the grip of the logical mind, to tilt you into confusion on purpose. Because in that moment of "I don't get it," your habitual thinking collapses, and in the silence that follows, something true can arise, not as a conclusion, but as a felt knowing, a shift in perception, the insight that can only bloom in stillness. When you begin to live this way, life becomes less of a chase and more of a dance. You don't need to know the next move. You just stay connected to the rhythm. When you lose balance, you return. When you feel lost, you breathe. You allow the moment to shape you rather than always trying to shape it. This is where peace lives. Not in having everything figured out, but in letting go of the need to. In beginner's mind, you start to see through illusions that once felt real. The belief that you're behind, that you're failing, that you need to catch up. These dissolve when you realize there's nowhere to get. You are not a project to be completed. You are a mystery to be lived. And the confusion you feel, that's not a flaw. That's the space where old identities are falling away, where new understanding is taking root beneath the surface. Even your emotions change. You stop labeling sadness as bad. You stop running from discomfort. Instead, you lean in. You study the shape of your own heart. You notice how pain softens when it's allowed to speak. You learn to hold confusion with kindness, like a friend who's grieving. You don't rush it. You sit with it. You learn its language, and slowly it teaches you things no book ever could. This is the wisdom Zen offers. Not answers, but a way of being. A way of relating to your life that's rooted in curiosity, not control. Presence, not perfection. And when this becomes your path, something changes deep inside. You stop needing to escape. You stop craving distraction. You begin to rest, right here, even in the unknown, even in the dark. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders soften. You realize the world doesn't need you to have it all figured out. It only asks that you show up, gently, honestly, willing to be changed by what you meet. That's all. And strangely, in that humility, you become strong, resilient, free, not because you've solved everything, but because you've made peace with not knowing. You no longer seek clarity like a prize. You let it come in its own time, and while you wait, you live, fully, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. You start to notice the beauty in small things, a breath, a breeze, the sound of silence at midnight. You realize these moments were always here. You were just too busy searching to feel them. So you begin again, not with goals or expectations, but with openness. The willingness to meet this moment as it is, to live in the question without demanding the answer. And in that surrender, the war inside you begins to end. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from realizing you don't need to. And as you lie here now, listening, something softens further. That tightness in your chest, it starts to release. Not all at once, but slowly, like frost melting under the sun. You feel a quiet acceptance taking root, not resignation, presence. A feeling that says, I may not know where I'm going, but I trust this path. I trust this breath. I trust this moment. Zen doesn't promise clarity. It offers something better. Presence without answers. Peace without needing control. Joy that's not dependent on anything outside of you. And when you live this way, you're never truly lost. You're simply open, awake, listening. You see, the beginner's mind doesn't mean starting over from scratch. It means starting over from presence, returning to what is real, the breath, the body, the moment, again and again, not to escape the unknown, but to rest inside it, to trust it, to let it become your teacher. And slowly, something blooms. Not a conclusion, not a plan, but a quiet knowing. You were never supposed to have it all figured out. You were only meant to be here, fully, tenderly, truthfully. This is where life lives, not in the answers, but in the courage to keep showing up with your heart open, even when nothing makes sense. So rest now. Let the questions stay unanswered. Let the path stay hidden. Let the not knowing be enough. Because right here, in this soft and spacious night, you are safe to not have the answers. You are allowed to be exactly where you are, and that is more than enough. And so you arrive at the still point, where not knowing feels less like a failure and more like freedom. The need to grasp, to define, to figure it all out has softened. What's left is presence, quiet, space. But now, a deeper curiosity begins to rise. If you're no longer chasing clarity, then what is this journey you're on? If feeling lost is not a problem, then what is it pointing you toward? This is where an ancient Zen teaching begins to unfold, one that traces the mysterious path through confusion, discovery, surrender, and awakening. It's called the 10 Bulls, a set of images and verses passed down through centuries of Zen. Not just art, but a mirror for your own inner journey. And whether you're at the start, in the middle, or unknowingly near the end, this parable speaks to you, not through rules or doctrine, but through symbols, silence, and deep recognition. The 10 Bulls do not describe a straight path. They reveal a cycle, a living movement through the layers of the self, peeling back illusions, uncovering truth, and then returning with that truth, not as theory, but as embodiment. This teaching does not separate your spiritual search from your daily life. It shows how every moment, even your lostness, is part of the sacred unfolding. Nothing wasted, nothing out of place. The first bull is absence. The seeker doesn't even know what's missing, only that something feels incomplete. This is the quiet ache that stirs before the journey begins, a feeling of emptiness, not in the spiritual sense, but in the restless, searching kind. You might feel it as disconnection, a dull anxiety that life is happening somewhere else, and you're just going through the motions. In this stage, the mind reaches out toward ideas, goals, distractions, but none of them satisfy. This is not a failure. This is the seed of awakening. You're beginning to sense that the world you've built is not the whole story. Then comes the footprint, the trace of something real. Not yet a clear path, but a sign. A moment that breaks through your ordinary awareness. It might come in stillness, or crisis, or joy that doesn't make sense. Something deeper stirs. You sense there is a truth beneath the surface of things, but it slips away when you try to grasp it. This moment can bring hope, but also frustration. You begin to search, not just for peace, but for what you are, for what's true beyond the noise. Finding the bull is not about success. It's about recognition, a glimpse of your own mind, unfiltered. You see, even for a moment, what drives your suffering. You see how thoughts pull you, how emotions twist you, how desire and fear dance inside you. But rather than turning away, you begin to watch. You realize you are not the thoughts. You are the awareness noticing them. This is the bull, your true nature, seen briefly between the clouds. Catching the bull is messy. This is where the struggle begins. You now know there is more to life than your thoughts, but the habits of mind don't let go easily. Old patterns resist. The ego tightens its grip. You try to meditate, to be still, but your mind runs wild. You try to live with awareness, but anger, judgment, and insecurity keep pulling you back. You may feel like you're failing, but this tension is part of the process. You are beginning to see your own conditioning, not as identity, but as layers. And that seeing is everything. Taming the bull is not about control, but relationship. You stop trying to overpower your mind and start learning how to live with it. You become patient with your distractions. You return to the breath, not to fix yourself, but to build trust. A trust that grows each time you come back, each time you notice, each time you soften instead of react. You are no longer lost in your thoughts. You are walking beside them. A silent witness, steady and kind. Riding the bull is joy. You begin to feel glimpses of ease. Awareness comes more naturally. You find moments of peace that don't depend on external circumstances. You start to enjoy the simplicity of being. Not every moment is bliss, but your center is stronger. You are less shaken by the highs and lows. There is a quiet confidence, not ego, but presence. Life feels less like a battle and more like a dance. You are no longer seeking peace. You are beginning to live it. The bull disappears. This moment can be startling. The self you were trying to awaken is gone. There is no longer a division between seeker and sought. What's left is awareness itself, clear, empty, awake. There are no fireworks here, no grand enlightenment, just a simplicity that is so total it can be hard to explain. You realize that all your efforts to reach truth were only necessary to exhaust the effort itself. What you were looking for was always here, but now you finally see it. The self disappears. The separation between you and life dissolves. No more observer and observed. Only this. Only now. This can feel like floating in space. Free, but disorienting. The mind cannot hold this moment. There are no concepts that fit. You may feel awe. You may feel nothing. Both are valid. What matters is that the illusion of separateness has faded. You are not in the world. You are the world. The breath, the wind, the sound, the silence. There is nothing outside of you and no you apart from it. Returning to the source means returning to the ordinary. But everything is different. You chop wood, carry water, but now there is clarity. No need to seek, no need to name. You eat when hungry, sleep when tired, but your presence is total. You are not trying to be spiritual. You are simply alive, fully, deeply, gently. This is the stage where wisdom becomes invisible. There is no performance, just truth, walking through the world in soft footsteps. Entering the marketplace with open hands is the final return. You do not retreat from the world, you move into it. But now you bring something rare, freedom that needs nothing. You are no longer here to teach or fix or prove. You are here to love, to serve, to embody stillness in motion. You move through crowds with quiet eyes. You speak from the heart. You smile without reason. And in your presence, others feel something shift. Not because of what you say, but because of what you are, spacious, present, whole. This entire journey is not about achieving anything. It's about seeing through everything that kept you from what already is. The 10 bulls do not take you somewhere else. They bring you home, to this breath, this body, this moment. And they remind you, even your confusion was sacred. Even your wandering was the path. Every lost step, every doubt, every question was part of your unfolding. This teaching reveals that awakening is not a single moment, but a rhythm, a spiral. You will lose the bull again. You will forget. You will fall back into ego, reactivity, distraction. But now you know the way back. You've seen the trace, you've touched the truth, and it never leaves you. Even when your mind is clouded, your heart remembers. Even when you feel alone, something inside is quietly steady. You learn that every stage is valuable, that there is no superior place to stand. Whether you're glimpsing the bull for the first time or walking back into the world with open hands, you are living the Dharma. There is no rush, no timeline, only the invitation to stay close to your own experience, to let it unfold with trust and curiosity. Zen doesn't ask you to believe, it asks you to look, to see for yourself. And what you see may change everything. Because once you've tasted presence, even for a breath, you know there's something deeper than fear, deeper than identity, deeper than all the thoughts that cloud your sleep. The 10 bulls aren't just a map of spiritual awakening. They're a reminder that even when you don't know where you are not off course. Even when you feel like nothing makes sense, you are still on the path. Confusion is not the opposite of truth. It's often the doorway to it. So when you feel lost, again, don't panic. Breathe, watch, listen. The bull is always near, sometimes hidden, sometimes running wild, sometimes sitting quietly beside you, waiting to be seen. Let this be your practice, not to chase it, but to notice, to stay with yourself gently, to live each moment as if it contains the whole truth, because it does. There is nothing more to seek, nothing more to fix, only this, the breath, the presence, the silence that holds it all. And within that silence, you are already home. So much of what shapes your life never began with you. Thoughts arise, emotions stir, decisions get made. And yet, sometimes it all feels foreign, as if you're reacting from a place you can't name. Even after catching glimpses of clarity, even after returning to presence, the pull of old habits remains. You notice that certain patterns repeat themselves, no matter how awake you try to be. Something deeper is at play, something older than memory, yet alive in every choice. This is where we turn toward the Yogacara understanding of the mind, not to escape responsibility, but to finally see what has been quietly shaping you from the inside out. In Yogacara philosophy, the mind is not just a stream of passing thoughts. It's a layered field where every experience, every perception, action, intention plants a seed. These seeds, called bija, don't disappear. They settle into the depths of consciousness, stored in what's known as the alaya vijnana, the storehouse mind. Long after the event is over, the seed remains. It waits. Conditions come together and it sprouts again. Sometimes as a thought, sometimes as a mood, sometimes as a full-blown identity you didn't even know you were carrying. This teaching does not blame, it illuminates. It says, what you're feeling today may be the fruit of something planted long ago, by you, or even before you. The anxiety, the self-doubt, the restlessness may not be personal flaws, but ripples from unseen causes. The path to freedom, then, isn't just trying to control the surface. It's about seeing into the roots, understanding what seeds are present in your mind and how they're being watered. Every reaction has a seed behind it. The sharp word that slips out when you're tired. The fear that tightens your chest in moments of uncertainty. The urge to compare, to prove, to run. These responses didn't appear from nowhere. They've been conditioned by repetition, by culture, by the small and large traumas of life. And unless these seeds are seen, they keep growing, not because you're failing, but because you're unaware. But here's the most important part. Seeds are not fixed. They don't define you. They respond to care, to attention. And just as a harmful seed can grow through neglect, a wholesome one can bloom through nourishment. When you start to recognize what's happening inside you, not just the thought itself, but the flavor of it, the feeling underneath it, you begin to know your inner garden. You start to see which emotions arise frequently, which thoughts are sticky, which moods linger longer than they need to. This isn't judgment. This is awareness. This awareness becomes powerful when you realize that not every seed needs to be fed. You don't have to follow every anxious thought. You don't have to argue with every critic in your head. Just noticing a pattern without feeding it is already an act of transformation, like refusing to water a weed. Eventually, it loses strength. This is not repression, it's wisdom, a choice to tend to your mind with clarity instead of compulsion. And the opposite is also true. You can feed what is beautiful. A moment of gratitude, no matter how small, plants a seed. Kindness toward yourself, toward others, is a seed. Every time you return to the breath, instead of reacting with anger, you plant presence. When you forgive, when you speak truthfully, when you pause before reacting, you're creating conditions for different outcomes. Even if it doesn't feel dramatic, it matters. Seeds are quiet, but they grow. Over time, this becomes a discipline of inner care. You watch your mind not as a judge, but as a gardener. You start to learn the weather patterns inside you, which thoughts appear on cloudy days, which emotions signal old wounds. You stop being surprised by your reactions and instead become curious. You create space, and in that space, freedom starts to grow. Yogacara also teaches that seeds influence perception itself. You don't just see the world as it is, you see it through the filter of your stored impressions. Two people can witness the same event and have completely different experiences. Why? Because their minds are seeded differently. This means your sense of truth is often a reflection of your conditioning, not an absolute reality. Recognizing this breaks down the rigid grip of your opinions. It humbles you, and it opens you to compassion for yourself and for others who carry different seeds. Understanding this shifts the way you deal with conflict. Instead of fighting over who is right, you begin to wonder what seeds are shaping this person's perception. You ask what unseen pain might be driving their actions. You stop expecting people to behave as if they share your history. This doesn't mean accepting harm, it means seeing clearly, responding from wisdom, not reaction. This teaching also brings a new lens to your suffering. The feelings that overwhelm you, the moods that trap you, they are not you. They are seeds sprouting in the conditions of this moment. When you identify with them, you suffer. But when you recognize them as temporary formations, you create space. You become less entangled. You can feel deeply without drowning. One of the most healing aspects of this view is that it allows you to hold your past with compassion. Maybe you look back and wonder why you acted the way you did, why certain choices keep repeating, why change is so hard. The answer, at least in part, lies in the seeds, some planted when you were young, some inherited from generations before you. When you understand this, you stop blaming yourself for the momentum you were born into. You stop expecting instant change, and you start working gently, patiently, from the roots. This doesn't mean surrendering to fate. It means recognizing the scope of transformation. That real change doesn't just happen at the surface level. It happens deep in the storehouse, through repetition, through care, through presence. Each time you choose patience over anger, honesty over avoidance, stillness over distraction, you are altering the seedbed of your future, slowly but surely. Meditation in this tradition becomes more than just relaxation. It's a way of accessing the storehouse. When you sit quietly and observe your thoughts, your emotional patterns, your mental habits, you are facing the seeds directly. You begin to recognize which ones arise most often, which ones come without invitation, and which ones you've been feeding without knowing. This is where real spiritual work happens, not in escaping thoughts, but in studying them. You begin to know which inner voices come from old wounds, which fears were passed down from parents, from culture, from history, and once seen, they lose some of their grip, not instantly, but gradually, as if the light of your attention softens their roots. This is not easy work. It requires honesty, patience, gentleness. But over time, you start to feel less controlled by your mind. You become more responsive, less reactive, and your suffering becomes a teacher, not a punishment. This also helps you understand why progress feels inconsistent, why some days you feel centered and others completely overwhelmed. It's not a failure, it's the unfolding of seeds. Different ones ripen at different times. A moment of peace can be followed by old anger, not because you're going backwards, but because another seed has come forward for your attention. The key is consistency, returning again and again, watering what is wise, not feeding what causes harm. And there's something else, something subtle but deeply freeing. When you understand that seeds shape experience, you stop clinging to your highs and stop fearing your lows. You know both are temporary, that no mood defines you, that every emotion has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This gives you courage. You can meet discomfort without needing to fix it. You can meet joy without needing to hold it. You become more fluid, more balanced, more at peace. In relationships, this changes everything. You stop expecting perfection. You stop demanding that others never trigger your old wounds. Instead, you begin to see relationships as part of the transformation. They stir seeds, they bring them to the surface. And that discomfort is not failure, it's opportunity to see more clearly, to respond more wisely, to heal. Even the people who challenge you the most become part of your growth, not because they're right or fair, but because they show you what's still alive inside your own mind. Anger, insecurity, attachment. These responses point to seeds still waiting to be tended. When you meet them with awareness, they begin to shift. Slowly, your inner world becomes less crowded, less noisy, and your outer relationships begin to reflect that change. This is the heart of transformation in Yogacara. Not a dramatic moment of awakening, but a steady rewiring of the inner field. Through daily choices, through inner listening, through remembering that every thought, every word, every action is a seed, and you are always planting something. So the question becomes, what are you watering? What are you feeding with your attention? Which patterns are you strengthening? Which habits are you beginning to question? These questions are not to shame you. They're here to guide you, to help you become more intentional, more aware of your power, because even in your lostness, even in the moments when you feel furthest from peace, you are still planting seeds. The way you speak to yourself, the way you breathe through uncertainty, the way you treat others when you're hurting. These are all seeds, and even when you don't feel strong, you can choose to plant what leads to freedom. This teaching brings you back to the long view, the patient view. You are not trying to fix your whole life overnight. You are tending a garden, one breath at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of presence again and again. And perhaps that is the most beautiful truth of all. That no matter how lost you feel, you are never too far gone. Because every moment is a chance to plant something new, something kind, something real. And with enough care, that small seed planted in darkness will grow, quietly, steadily, into light. And just like that, the seed is planted, quietly, with care. You begin to live from the inside out, not reacting to life, but responding from depth. The old conditioning doesn't vanish overnight, but you've seen it clearly, and that alone changes everything. Still, something deeper calls. Beneath the mind, beneath the patterns, beneath even the seeds, there is something else. Not a thing, not a goal, a space, silent, vast, often misunderstood, but always here. It's not another idea to grasp. It's what remains when the grasping falls away. This is shunyata, emptiness, but not in the way the word usually feels, not void, not meaningless, not despair. Emptiness in Buddhism is not a hole, it's openness, a space without edges, a silence that's full of life. It's the absence of fixed form, fixed identity, fixed truth. And in that absence, something radical is revealed. You were never as solid as you thought. Nothing was. This realization is not meant to destroy meaning. It's meant to dissolve illusion. The illusion that things exist independently, permanently, from their own side. The belief that you are a fixed entity moving through a stable world. When you really begin to see this, the grip loosens. The stories, the roles, the labels, they start to float. And in their place, something softer arises. Presence, not defined, not explained, just known by its quiet. Many people fear emptiness because they think it erases the value of life. But that fear only comes from misunderstanding. Emptiness is not a denial of life. It's life without clinging. It's love without control. It's awareness without the need to name. What you lose in certainty, you gain in freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't depend on the world behaving the way you want it to. When the mind rests in shunyata, it stops fighting for position. There is no longer a need to be right, to win, to protect an identity. Without the walls of me and mine, there is less to defend, less tension, less fear. You begin to meet each moment not with conclusions, but with openness, not trying to hold anything still, just being with what is. And in that space, compassion deepens, because without a fixed sense of self, the boundary between you and others becomes thinner. Their pain is not separate. Their joy touches you more easily. Empathy is no longer an effort. It becomes the natural response of an unguarded heart. Emptiness doesn't make you cold. It makes you tender. Because you are no longer trying to be anything. You are simply here. This experience is not always dramatic. Often it's subtle. A shift in how you see. A softening in how you listen. A moment where the usual sense of separation fades and what's left is just presence. No label, no inner commentary, just the unfolding of experience, moment to moment, without a center, without resistance. Even suffering changes in this space. Pain still arises, of course it does, but it doesn't stick in the same way. Without a solid self to cling to it, pain becomes sensation, experience. Something to meet with care, but not something to become. This isn't denial, it's clarity, a quiet clarity that lets the heart stay open, even in grief, even in loss. And the same is true for joy. You don't need to possess it to feel it fully. You don't need to fear its ending. Joy, too, is empty. Not in a hollow way, but in a free way. It comes, it goes. You bow to it without needing it to stay. And in doing so, you are no longer a hostage to conditions. You are free to love what is, as it is. This freedom can be disorienting at first. The mind wants something to hold, a belief, a purpose, a structure. But shunyata is not nihilism. It doesn't say nothing matters. It says nothing is fixed. And that includes meaning. You are free to create meaning, but you're no longer trapped by it. You see meaning as a living thing, not a final truth. That shift changes how you live. You stop asking, what is the meaning of life, as if there is one final answer to be discovered. Instead, you ask, how can I meet this moment fully? And the moment answers you, not with words, but with a quiet pulse that runs through everything, a knowing that doesn't need explanation. Shunyata also changes your relationship with time. When there is no fixed self to defend or promote, the urgency to become someone fades. You're no longer rushing toward a future identity. You begin to relax into the present, not because you're giving up, but because you're waking up. You start to see how much of your suffering came from trying to hold on to what was never yours to keep. In this space, death itself begins to feel different, not as a final failure, but as part of the unfolding. The ego fears death because it believes it is the end. But shunyata reveals that what you are has no fixed beginning or end. What dies is the story. What remains is the space where all stories begin and dissolve. Resting in emptiness doesn't mean you lose function. You still act. You still choose. But your actions arise from presence, not pressure. You stop performing your life and begin living it. You stop trying to prove something and start listening deeply to what is here beneath the surface. This listening is not passive, it's alert. It's how insight arises, not from thinking harder, but from letting the noise drop away. In the silence, clarity appears, not as a conclusion, but as a direct seeing. You don't figure things out, you feel them emerge like mist lifting from a field. This is the wisdom that emptiness offers, a truth that doesn't need to be grasped to be real. And yet, this truth cannot be forced. You can't make yourself experience shunyata, but you can learn to stop resisting it. You can stop clinging to the need for meaning, the need for control, the need to always know. And in that letting go, something opens. Not something new, but something that was always here, waiting behind the noise. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes real, direct, undivided. You feel what you feel without needing to package it. You meet people where they are without needing to fix them. You live not to prove worth, but to express presence. And that expression is its own kind of fulfillment, one that doesn't depend on applause. You may still struggle, still forget, still fall into old stories, but now you know there is a space beneath all of it, a silence that is never disturbed. And even in your most painful moments, that silence holds you. Not by removing pain, but by making room for it. A vast room where everything can arise and everything can pass. When you start to trust this space, your relationship with effort shifts. You still practice, you still grow, but the striving softens. You're not trying to become empty. You're learning to see that you already are. And in that emptiness, nothing is missing. Because nothing is fixed, because everything is alive. This is not a cold truth, it's a warm one. Emptiness is what allows connection. Without fixed borders, life flows. Without rigid definitions, love becomes expansive. Without the need to defend your identity, you become available to others, to change, to truth. Not because you've given up on self, but because you've seen through it. And this seeing brings peace. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace of openness, of not needing to hold everything together, of trusting that the ground beneath your feet doesn't have to be solid for you to walk. That life doesn't have to be understood for you to belong. This is shunyata, not a concept, not a belief, a lived reality, a space that can hold your joy, your grief, your uncertainty, your beauty, a space that asks nothing from you, but that offers everything, once you stop trying to possess it. So you rest, not in answers, not in identities, but in the absence that holds it all, the absence that is not empty of life, but empty of struggle, empty of should, empty of comparison. In this emptiness, you are full of presence, of possibility, of quiet truth. And from that place, everything you do becomes different, softer, freer, less bound by outcome, more rooted in presence. And that presence is enough, always has been. Because when you stop needing to make meaning, life shows you meaning in ways you never expected. Not through certainty, but through awe. Not through explanation, but through intimacy. The kind of intimacy that needs no words, just space, just breath, just now. So you rest, not needing to explain anything, no longer chasing solid ground. From that stillness, life keeps moving, not as something to control, but as something to meet. And even within that peace, there's a return to the world, to the everyday, to the cycles that pull you in again, the same thoughts, the same patterns, the same questions. You notice them with more softness now, but still they return. It might feel like a loop, a mistake, a sign that you've fallen off the path. But what if this cycle isn't failure at all? What if it's the path itself? Samsara is often misunderstood. People hear the word and think suffering, punishment, failure to awaken. But it's not a punishment. It's a process. It's the pattern of becoming, dissolving, becoming again. The wheel of craving and consequence, of habits repeating until they're seen clearly. It's not a problem to erase. It's a labyrinth, complex, confusing, but not without meaning. And the deeper truth is this: you're not here to escape the maze. You're here to understand it. Cyclical suffering doesn't mean you're doing life wrong. It means you're still learning. The same emotions rising again don't prove you've failed. They show you where you still hold tightly, where old stories still speak, where deeper understanding is waiting. You aren't meant to walk a straight line. You're meant to spiral inward, meeting the same places from a wiser place each time. The turning of samsara is personal, but also shared. Your experience of it may be subtle, shifts in mood, restless cravings, emotional habits that come back just when you thought they were gone. It may also be loud, relationships repeating, choices echoing, mistakes recurring, and you may ask, why am I back here again? But the answer isn't because you failed. The answer is because you're ready to see something more clearly this time. Awareness doesn't always stop the return, but it changes what you do when it happens. In Buddhist thought, samsara isn't just external reality, it's the projection of an inner landscape. It's how we interpret experience through grasping, aversion, and delusion. These aren't sins, they're misunderstandings. You grasp what you think will make you whole. You push away what you fear will hurt you. You forget the emptiness of it all and try to make it solid. And this is how the cycle keeps turning. But there's wisdom even in that. Because over time, the very things that cause pain also become your teachers. The pattern shows itself not to punish, but to invite attention. And as you bring presence to each loop, something loosens, maybe just a little, maybe not all at once, but a shift happens. You catch the craving before it turns into clinging. You feel the anger without letting it define your actions. You notice the fear, but choose to stay open anyway. In this way, samsara becomes a teacher, not because it's gentle, but because it's honest. It reflects you to yourself again and again until you see through the illusion. The pattern isn't random, it's precise. Every moment arrives shaped by the seeds you've planted, the conditions you've created, and this includes the conditions you're no longer fueling, the ones you've begun to outgrow. The wheel doesn't turn forever in the same way. It shifts with your attention. This makes your practice not just about stopping pain, but about seeing pain clearly. You begin to understand your suffering as feedback, not punishment. It tells you where you're still holding on, where you've believed something false, where you've turned away from your own wisdom. You don't need to fight this. You need to listen, because hidden in the confusion is the clue. the thread, the path. The maze becomes less threatening when you stop expecting a straight exit, when you learn to sit down right where you are and study the walls, the echo, the rhythm. Samsara doesn't require panic. It asks for presence, a willingness to be where you are, even when it's messy, especially then, because that's when the most subtle insights come. These insights are rarely loud. They arrive as shifts in how you respond. The craving arises and you pause. The thought repeats and you don't believe it. The feeling floods your chest and you meet it with breath instead of blame. These moments may seem small, but they are everything. Each one turns the wheel in a new direction. Each one creates space, and in that space, the cycle begins to dissolve. The idea isn't to escape life. The idea is to live with more clarity, to stop spinning from reaction and begin moving with intention. This doesn't mean you never suffer. It means suffering no longer defines you. You don't build your identity on it. You don't let it drag you blindly. You walk with it. And sometimes you walk beyond it. Samsara is vast because it reflects everything, not just pain, but joy too. And even joy can become a loop when it's clung to, when it becomes another form of grasping. That's why even beauty must be met with balance, with awareness. You enjoy the moment, but you don't try to freeze it. You let the joy rise and fall like the breath, full and then empty again, nothing to hold. This is what softens the edge of repetition. When you stop expecting things to stay the same, you suffer less when they change. When you stop believing the story of again, you start to see now. And in now, nothing is repeating. Even the same thoughts, the same emotions, they're never truly identical. They are new waves on a familiar shore. What's different is how you greet them. This greeting becomes your practice. You stop asking, "Why is this happening again?" and instead ask, "How can I meet this freshly?" And that changes everything. Because in samsara, it's not what happens that matters most, it's how you relate to it. The moment you stop reacting in the old way, you create a gap, and in that gap, insight is born. The insight may be wordless. It may not arrive as understanding. It may simply be peace. The sense that you no longer have to fix anything. You're here. You're breathing. You're witnessing the wheel turn, but you're not trapped inside it. You're aware of the movement without being moved by it. That's liberation, not escape, but intimacy with what is. Samsara, seen this way, becomes less of a prison and more of a mirror. It shows you what you haven't fully met yet, where you still resist, where you still forget your own nature. And that forgetfulness is not wrong. It's part of the unfolding. The forgetting leads you to the remembering. The falling leads you to the rising. Nothing is wasted. This is why every return to the same place can be a deeper descent, not a failure. The pattern might look the same, but your awareness isn't. And it's your awareness that shapes the path. The more you see, the less you react. The less you react, the more you rest. And in that rest, you begin to recognize the space between the turns of the wheel. That space grows over time. It becomes something steady inside you, a still point. Not a place you escape to, but a place you live from. And from that place, you can move through samsara without being defined by it. You can meet joy and loss, chaos and calm, with the same heart. Not because they're the same, but because your presence doesn't depend on either one. This is where wisdom matures. You no longer look for peace in outcomes. You find it in the middle of everything, in the turning itself. You accept the flow, and in that acceptance, you stop being pulled under. You ride the wave, you bow to the moment, and slowly, the need to control softens. Even your idea of spiritual growth changes. It's not about reaching higher states, it's about deepening where you are, rooting into reality as it is, not as you want it to be. Letting the cycles be teachers, not tests. Letting the mess be part of the message. Letting confusion open you, not close you. This shift is quiet, but it's profound. Because now, even your most tangled moments have meaning. Not because they're pleasant, but because they're part of the path. Every loop has something to teach you. Every return shows you a place where compassion can grow deeper, where presence can take root. And the deeper you go, the more you begin to see that samsara and nirvana are not two separate places. They're two ways of seeing the same world. One is seen through craving and fear, the other through clarity and acceptance. The outer world doesn't change, but your relationship to it does, and that changes everything. You start to live differently, less urgency, less comparison, more space, more care. You stop trying to get somewhere, and instead you arrive, again and again, fully, even in discomfort, even in doubt. You let life shape you without distorting you. You let the path take time, because it's not a race, it's a return, over and over, until even the return feels like home. And when you fall again, and you will, you fall with awareness. You fall more gently. You don't spiral into shame. You touch the ground, breathe, and rise. Because now you know the labyrinth is not a mistake. It's a mirror, and the path through it is made by how you walk it, with presence, with honesty, with a heart willing to stay, not to escape, not to win, but to understand. And through that understanding, to be free. You begin to see that even the return holds wisdom, that each turn through the labyrinth is a call to look more closely, not to escape. Nothing is wasted, not even the pain, especially not the pain. Because in the moments you try hardest to resist, to run, to hide, something old appears, something many have met before you. That voice, that pressure, that doubt, the one that shows up not to comfort, but to challenge. In Buddhist tradition, this presence has a name, not to blame, but to recognize, Mara, often misunderstood as evil, as the enemy. But what if Mara isn't just here to tempt or destroy? What if Mara is the mirror you've been avoiding? Mara appears in many forms, not always dramatic, sometimes as boredom, as self-pity, as the thought that you'll never be enough, sometimes as ambition dressed in spiritual language, other times as the voice that says you've already failed, so why bother continuing? Mara doesn't need horns or fire. Mara uses your own mind. Doubt, desire, fear, fatigue, each one a thread he weaves into your thoughts until they feel like truth. But they are not truth. They are invitations, not pleasant ones, but necessary. The Buddha didn't conquer Mara by force. He didn't banish him with violence. He did something more radical. He saw him, named him, and stayed. Over and over Mara would appear, trying to push the Buddha off his seat, under the Bodhi tree, and each time the Buddha would simply say, "I see you, Mara." No fear, no fight, just awareness. And Mara would vanish, not because he was destroyed, but because he was no longer hidden. This is the key. Mara operates in shadows, in avoidance, in the stories you don't want to question. The more you run, the stronger he seems. But when you turn toward him, without panic, without judgment, his shape begins to dissolve, because Mara thrives on unconsciousness. He feeds on unexamined beliefs. Once you bring light to them, they lose their grip, not instantly, not easily, but steadily. Recognizing Mara in your life begins with honesty, noticing when thoughts turn heavy, urgent, sharp, when fear begins to dictate your choices, when your mind whispers that you're alone, unloved, incapable. These moments aren't random, they're thresholds, points of testing, yes, but also of revelation. Mara doesn't appear to end your path. He appears at the edge of growth, right when you're about to let go of something old. Many people think the spiritual journey is about peace and light, but often the doorway to truth is guarded by discomfort. Mara is that discomfort. The doubt that comes right before you step into a new way of being. The temptation to return to what's familiar, even if it hurts. The urge to numb, to blame, to quit. Not because you're weak, but because something inside you is being confronted, and it doesn't want to change. But change doesn't come from force. It comes from clarity. From sitting with your confusion instead of trying to silence it. From meeting your resistance not with shame, but with curiosity. What is this thought protecting? What part of me still believes I am not enough? What would happen if I didn't believe this voice? Mara's greatest trick is making you identify with your lowest moments, making you believe the doubt is yours, that the anger is who you are, that the fear means you should stop. But when you begin to observe instead of merge, something powerful happens. You create space. You begin to see that the voice is just a voice, that thoughts can arise without your agreement, and in that gap, something else becomes possible. This is where Mara becomes a teacher, not because he offers wisdom, but because he reveals your unhealed places, the sharp corners of the self still built on fear, the identities still defended by ego. He doesn't offer compassion, but he shows you where compassion is needed. He doesn't offer truth, but he shows you what lies you still believe. And in this, Mara becomes essential. Not as a friend, but as a mirror. Without him, you might never stop to look so deeply. You might think your surface peace was enough. But Mara brings you down into the roots, into the places where awakening must reach to be real, not just on the cushion, but in your life. In the moments when love feels risky, when forgiveness feels impossible, when patience feels too slow. Mara teaches through disruption, through the thoughts that shake you, through the feelings you don't want to feel, but his presence means something is alive in you. Something is shifting. If there were nothing to awaken, Mara would have no reason to come. The more devoted you are to truth, the more subtle his forms may become. He's not always loud. Sometimes he appears as fatigue when you sit to meditate. Sometimes as a feeling that your practice isn't doing anything. Sometimes as the thought that others are further ahead and you'll never catch up. All of these are lies, not because the feelings aren't real, but because the conclusions they lead you to are incomplete. Mara offers shortcuts, escapes. He tells you comfort is better than growth, that safety is better than honesty, that distraction is better than presence, and when you're tired, those offers sound good. But if you listen closely, you'll notice something hollow in them, something that doesn't satisfy. That's the clue. That's when you know it's not truth speaking. Truth speaks differently. It doesn't rush. It doesn't shame. It waits. Quiet. Constant. Underneath the noise. And when you stop reacting to Mara, you can hear it again. Not in grand answers, but in breath. In stillness, in the part of you that knows what matters even when your mind forgets. This is how you stay, not by pushing Mara away, but by not letting him sit in your center. You welcome him, name him, and keep your seat. The thoughts may still come, the emotions may still flood, but your relationship to them changes. You stop fighting them as enemies. You meet them as signals. Something has been triggered. Something is rising, not to harm you, but to be seen. This seeing is the beginning of freedom. It's not about removing discomfort. It's about learning how to stay with it, to see what it reveals, to recognize that Mara never arrives without bringing the chance to deepen your practice, to clarify your path, to recommit to what matters. Mara may whisper, "This is too hard." He may offer 1,000 reasons to quit, but you don't have to believe him. You can bow to him with kindness and stay seated. The storm may rage, the mind may twist, but your awareness can remain open. That's how the Buddha responded, not with force, but with presence. And this is what you're cultivating. Not just peace, but strength. Not just insight, but resilience. The ability to face what scares you without running. The courage to stay when it would be easier to escape. The wisdom to know that even your darkest moments are part of the path, not detours, not failures, but necessary ground. This is not easy. It asks more of you than you think you have. But that's where the gift lies. Because each time you meet Mara and stay, you discover something new in yourself. Something that was always there, waiting to be uncovered by your refusal to look away. And slowly, something shifts. Mara becomes less terrifying, not because he disappears, but because you stop confusing him with truth. You stop giving him the final word. He may still visit, but you no longer offer him your identity. You see him as part of the process, a shadow at the doorway. And instead of shutting the door, you breathe and walk through. In this way, every encounter with fear becomes a reminder of your capacity. Every temptation to turn back becomes a chance to deepen your trust. Every voice that tells you you're not ready becomes an opportunity to say, "Maybe I am," not because you feel confident, but because you're willing to find out. You don't need to be fearless to face Mara. You need only be willing. Willing to look, to listen, to stay. To keep your heart open when it would be easier to close. To keep your breath steady when the thoughts spiral. To say again and again, "I see you, but I will not follow." And that's the shift. From being pulled into confusion to using confusion as a doorway. From seeing discomfort as failure to seeing it as a signal. From fighting your mind to befriending your awareness. Mara doesn't disappear forever, but his power fades when you stop giving him your trust. So when he returns, and he will, you can meet him differently, with steadiness, with compassion, with the quiet strength that says, "You are not my enemy, you are my mirror, and I will use what you reveal, not to turn away from myself, but to turn more fully toward truth." This is the teaching hidden in darkness, that your deepest confusion is not the end. It is the place where awakening begins, not because you rise above it, but because you enter it fully with eyes open. And in that brave seeing, Mara loses his throne, not through defeat, but through your refusal to abandon yourself. Even when you see through Mara, even when you stop letting fear dictate your steps, something inside still reaches. It wants certainty, it wants proof, it wants the final answer that will make it all make sense. But after the doubt and the tests, after the resistance and the breakthrough, there comes a quieter threshold, one that doesn't demand anything from you, one that doesn't speak in words or give you formulas, and it waits patiently beneath your searching. This is where the teachings shift. This is where the silence of Vimalakirti begins. He was not a monk, not a sage who lived in seclusion. He was a layperson, a householder, someone who walked through the noise of the world. But his clarity cut deeper than scholars, deeper than arguments. And when the most revered disciples were sent to question him, he answered in a way that shattered categories. He said nothing. Not out of ignorance, not out of evasion, but because silence was the only response that matched the depth of the question. When you reach the edge of conceptual thought, silence becomes the only true language. It doesn't offer you information, it offers you direct contact with the mind before labels, with the truth that cannot be wrapped in logic. Not because logic is bad, but because it has limits, and those limits become clear when your need for explanation has exhausted itself. Silence is not avoidance. It's intimacy without words. It's a way of meeting reality that does not divide it into parts. It sees without defining. It feels without controlling. And in that openness, a different kind of knowing arises. One that cannot be quoted, but can be lived. One that cannot be captured, but can be trusted. This kind of silence is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of struggle. It's what remains when the mind stops demanding resolution, when it no longer insists that every feeling be explained, every experience labeled, every question answered. In this space, the need to fix dissolves. You stop measuring your progress, you stop performing your path. You simply rest in what is here. The silence Vimalakirti offered wasn't passive. It was a response more powerful than debate. It exposed the limits of doctrine. It showed that ultimate truth is not something you hold, it's something that holds you. And once you begin to taste that, the urge to argue fades, the hunger for conclusions softens. You don't need to win anything. You begin to live more fully because you're no longer trying to wrap life in neat explanations. This does not mean you stop thinking. It means thinking no longer owns you. You can use the mind like a tool, but you no longer confuse it with reality. You know when to speak and when to stop. You recognize when words help and when they divide. And this changes how you communicate, not just with others, but with yourself. Inner silence doesn't mean the mind stops producing thoughts. It means you stop clinging to them. They pass like clouds. You feel them arise, but you don't build identity around them. You stop trying to narrate every moment. You let the present unfold without needing to capture it. And in that surrender, you find a peace that thinking cannot reach. This is not about becoming numb. It's about becoming clear. Because in silence, you start to hear more. The subtleties of experience, the quiet feedback of your body, the underlying tone of your emotions. Words can hide truth. Silence reveals it. And the longer you can stay in that space, the more naturally wisdom arises. Not as a conclusion, but as a quality of presence. In many traditions, silence is treated as a retreat from life. But here, silence is not withdrawal. It's full participation without resistance. It's being so present that nothing extra is needed. You're not spacing out, you're arriving completely. You don't need a script, you don't need to analyze, you need only to feel the fullness of now. That kind of silence teaches you more than books ever could, because it teaches from within, from direct contact with what is real, not filtered through opinion, not diluted by interpretation, just raw, quiet presence. And once you learn to rest in that, you no longer fear not having the right words. You trust the experience. You let it be enough. Vimalakirti's silence was not a tactic. It was transmission. It pointed to something beyond form, to a truth that lives inside you already, but it gets buried under noise, mental noise, emotional noise, social noise. The silence cuts through it, not violently, but like clear water dissolving the dust. It doesn't need to argue, it simply shines, and that shining touches others. You begin to notice how your presence affects the world more than your ideas, how the energy you carry matters more than what you say. You learn to speak less and mean more. You learn to listen with your whole being, not just your ears. And people feel it, even if they can't name it. They feel the steadiness in you, the lack of agenda, the quiet respect for what is real. This way of being creates space in relationships. You don't jump in to fix. You don't rush to explain. You wait. You hold space for others to find their own wisdom. You trust that truth doesn't always need your defense, that sometimes the best answer is your full attention. Even in your inner life, this changes things. When pain arises, you stop dissecting it. You feel it fully without needing to describe it. You let it move. When joy arises, you let it glow without trying to hold it still. Silence gives everything room to breathe, and from that breath, insight blossoms. This silence is not fragile. It's strong. It can hold your confusion, your doubt, your grief. It can hold joy without turning it into a goal. It doesn't need certainty to be steady, and that steadiness becomes your ground, especially in moments when nothing makes sense. You may find that your spiritual path begins to simplify. You no longer chase mystical experiences. You stop collecting philosophies. You return to the basics: breath, body, presence. You realize that truth isn't something you arrive at. It's something you recognize, and that recognition happens in stillness. This stillness is not always peaceful at first. It can feel raw, exposed. You may see things you've avoided. You may feel the echo of pain that words once protected you from. But if you stay, if you breathe, that rawness becomes clarity. You stop defending yourself from life. You let it meet you. And in that meeting, something shifts. You don't need life to explain itself. You trust its rhythm. You let it unfold without needing control. You listen more, react less. You ask fewer questions, not because you've given up, but because you're learning to let the answers arrive in their own time. You start to see that silence is not a pause between truths. It is a truth. A living, breathing field where everything finds its place. Not fixed, but fluid. Not static, but full of possibility. And in that field, you begin to live differently. You don't need to name every stage of your growth. You don't need to prove your insights. You carry them like a lamp in the dark, quiet, steady, enough. You meet life as it is, without needing it to reassure you. You stop performing and start being, fully, without decoration. And others feel it. They may not understand what's different about you, but they feel the stillness, the non-reactivity, the depth. And in that depth, they find space for their own reflection. Your silence becomes an offering, not of answers, but of permission, to slow down, to feel, to be. The teachings of Vimalakirti aren't about techniques, they're about presence. They invite you to stop searching for the perfect path and instead inhabit the truth that's already here, to meet each moment without needing to speak over it, to let silence do its work. And that work is ongoing. It's not a state you reach, but a practice you return to, a space you keep clearing so life can speak through you, not loudly, not dramatically, but truthfully. So when the noise returns, and it will, you remember, you don't need to silence the world. You only need to rest in the silence that holds it all, not as an escape, but as a foundation, not to turn away, but to turn inward, where the deepest truths do not shout, they wait, they breathe, they hold. And in that quiet holding, you find everything you were seeking, not in the answer, but in the space that no longer needs one. The silence doesn't end. It simply deepens into something wider, something that no longer separates this moment from the next, or this breath from the world around you. Stillness reveals something more than peace. It shows you connection. Not connection as a theory, but as direct experience, the sense that nothing stands alone, that every movement, thought, sound, and pause is part of a larger whole. And suddenly, even your feeling of being lost doesn't isolate you. It places you within a vast, living network, a pattern beyond comprehension, but not beyond presence. This is where the Avatamsaka Sutra begins to speak. It does not speak in commandments. It paints visions, layered, infinite, interwoven worlds, each one reflecting all the others. A single leaf contains galaxies. A single thought ripples through time. The text does not try to make sense in the way the linear mind demands. It expands your sense of what's possible. It opens you to a world where your life is not separate from anything else, where everything you touch, feel, think, and do exists inside a net of boundless reflection. This teaching isn't meant to overwhelm, it's meant to reorient, to shift your perspective from separation to total intimacy. Because when you're caught in confusion, it's easy to feel like you've stepped off the path, as if there's a map you've failed to follow. But the Avatamsaka reveals there is no single path. There are infinite threads, and they all meet. Every step you take, no matter how uncertain, intersects with countless others. You are never outside the web. Even your detours belong. In this vision, a single action holds weight far beyond its appearance. A kind word, a silent prayer, a simple pause before reacting. Each one sends vibrations through the entire network of life. You begin to realize how deeply interwoven everything is, that your thoughts are not confined to your skull, that your attention moves into the world, that nothing is just personal. Every emotion, every movement affects the shape of the whole. This teaching invites a kind of reverence for the ordinary, not because it romanticizes daily life, but because it reveals its depth. Washing a bowl becomes sacred not through ritual, but through awareness of its place in the total fabric of existence. The bowl, your hand, the water, the intention behind the movement, all of it reflects the entire cosmos. The sutra does not separate the spiritual from the physical. It brings the sacred into every detail. You begin to see that being lost is not a problem to solve. It is part of a larger rhythm. Like a wave that rises and falls, your not knowing is a phase of connection. You may feel disconnected, but the web holds you. It does not need you to understand it. It simply includes you. The sutra teaches that nothing ever falls out of reality. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is excluded. Even your doubt, your wandering, your silence, they all echo across the net. The image of Indra's net, often associated with this sutra, shows a vast web with a jewel at every crossing. Each jewel reflects all the others. Each reflection contains infinite reflections within it. You are one of those jewels, but you are not just reflecting others, you are being reflected too. Your confusion appears in others' stories. Your healing helps shape someone else's unseen turning point. You are both the receiver and the mirror. Never alone, always seen. This view changes your sense of responsibility, not through guilt or pressure, but through awe. Every moment becomes a chance to support the whole. Every small act becomes meaningful. You begin to live with more care, not because you're afraid of doing wrong, but because you felt the weight of interconnection. You know that nothing you do is isolated, that how you treat yourself, how you speak to others, how you respond in private, all of it matters. But this doesn't lead to perfectionism, it leads to gentleness. Because you see that everyone is caught in the same net, everyone is learning, everyone's suffering echoes through the same strands, and so does everyone's love. There is no clean break between light and dark, between clarity and confusion. There is only the shifting dance of causes and conditions, each moment unfolding in response to all the others. You stop needing to be the center of the story. You stop needing to be the hero. You let go of the illusion that your journey must stand out to be real. Instead, you begin to feel the beauty of your smallness, not as insignificance, but as part of something vast and shared. Your experience matters precisely because it is not separate. And the moment you stop isolating it, it becomes medicine. For you and for the whole. This medicine spreads not through effort, but through presence. When you sit with your sadness fully, it ripples as permission for others to do the same. When you breathe through your fear with tenderness, you help soften the edge of fear in the collective. The Avatamsaka Sutra doesn't promise you control, it offers you belonging, a sense that what you are matters not because of your success, but because of your sincerity. Even suffering viewed through this lens becomes relational. Pain is no longer punishment. It is a vibration moving through the net, shaped by countless unseen forces. Your task is not to resist it, but to hold it with presence, to let it pass through you without closing. And in doing so, you heal more than just yourself. You make the net more transparent, more compassionate, more whole. This teaching doesn't require belief, it asks for attention, for the willingness to see things not as separate events, but as reflections, to see your relationships, your habits, your thoughts, not as isolated experiences, but as conversations between countless layers of existence. It invites you to let go of the idea that your confusion means something has gone wrong. It may simply mean you are in the middle of a turning, a shift too complex to be seen from your current angle. In that moment, humility becomes a form of strength. You stop pretending to know what everything means. You learn to bow to complexity, not to give up, but to stay open, to remain curious, to trust that even what feels chaotic is part of something whole. And in that trust, you begin to relax into your own place, not the place you chose, but the place you're in, the one that is already connected to everything else. The sutra speaks of bodhisattvas who move through countless worlds, each one nested within another, not as fantasy, but as a way to speak about the complexity of experience, that even a simple conversation may hold layers you cannot see, that one act of kindness may ripple through dimensions of being, that your presence here, now, might be the result of lifetimes of effort, not just yours, but others. You begin to walk through your life with more reverence, not needing it to be dramatic, letting the subtle count, letting the quiet matter. You start to feel the sacredness of moments you once overlooked, not because they are rare, but because they are saturated with connection, with echoes, with meaning that does not announce itself, but waits to be felt. And perhaps most profoundly, you stop measuring your worth by clarity. You stop asking whether your path looks like someone else's. You trust the invisible strands that led you here. You stop trying to rush toward some imagined destination. You realize that the feeling of being suspended, of floating without direction, may be exactly what the web needs in this moment. Not your certainty, but your openness. Not your answers, but your willingness to stay. This sutra does not simplify life. It reveals its endless depth. But in doing so, it quiets the urgency to figure it all out. You start to listen for the patterns, for the subtle harmonies, for the guidance that does not shout. And sometimes you'll find yourself moving differently, speaking with less noise, walking with more care, not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because you've remembered that nothing stands alone, and that includes your confusion, your grief, your lostness. They are not errors in the design, they are part of the song, and when you stop resisting them, you hear something new, not the sound of answers, but the echo of truth, reverberating through every thread. You are not waiting to belong. You already do. You are not separate from the mystery. You are woven into it. You are not behind. You are exactly where the net holds you, not lost, just floating. And even that is sacred. The sense of floating, of not knowing where you're going, starts to feel different. Less like failure, more like being part of something beyond your control, but not beyond your care. You begin to understand that being here, in this body, in this moment, with this heart, is not an accident. It's part of a great unfolding. Every experience you've had, every choice, even the ones you regret, has shaped the conditions of now. This isn't a story of randomness. It's the quiet rhythm of dependent origination, not a theory of blame, but of deep, intricate causality. Nothing you've done is separate from what has brought you here. In Buddhist thought, dependent origination explains how all things come into being, not from nowhere and not alone. Everything arises because of something else. Nothing stands on its own. Thoughts arise because of sensations. Sensations arise because of contact. Contact arises because of perception, and so on, in a long chain that shows how experience is not static or fixed, but always moving, always influenced by what comes before. This includes every so-called wrong turn. They are not separate from the path. They are the path. Mistakes, failures, delays, changes of direction, they are not breaks in your growth. They are expressions of the causes and conditions shaping you. The belief in a wrong path comes from the idea that there is one correct way through life and everything else is deviation. But what if deviation is also dharma? What if straying, stumbling, pausing, falling behind? What if all of it belongs? Dependent origination teaches that nothing comes from nowhere. Every moment is the result of countless interwoven causes. Some of these causes are clear, others are ancient, unseen, subtle. But all of them are real. Your suffering has roots. Your joy has causes. And when you begin to look at your life through this lens, the blame softens. You stop saying, "I should have known better," and start asking, "What were the conditions?" You replace judgment with understanding. And from that understanding, healing becomes possible. You might think, "But I made the wrong choice. I stayed too long. I left too soon." Dependent origination doesn't erase responsibility, it expands it. It says, yes, that choice happened, and it didn't arise in a vacuum. It came from your understanding at the time, from your fears, from your hopes, from your karmic patterns, from your environment, from your beliefs about love or worth or safety. It came from causes, and those causes can be understood, not condemned. This understanding brings a kind of mercy. You begin to trace the path backward, not to dwell in the past, but to see it clearly. To say, "Of course, I acted that way. Look at everything that led up to it." This doesn't mean you excuse harm. It means you look at harm with eyes wide open, with a heart willing to see beyond blame, because blame traps you in the past. But understanding allows you to move differently now. The myth of a wrong path is persistent because it feeds on regret. It tells you that you should be somewhere else by now, someone else, doing something else. But dependent origination interrupts that myth. It says, where you are is not a mistake. It is the result of everything that came before. And what you do next becomes part of what's coming. You're never off the path. You're just standing in one moment of a vast unfolding. Even moments of confusion are not outside this chain. Confusion arises because of conditions. It's not proof of failure. It's a sign that your understanding is shifting, that your old frameworks no longer fit. When you see confusion as part of dependent origination, you stop trying to rush through it. You let it be a valid part of your becoming. This also changes how you view others. When someone acts in a way that hurts you or confuses you, instead of labeling them as bad or wrong, you begin to wonder what conditions are shaping their behavior. You see their reactivity, their silence, their anger, not as isolated flaws, but as results of causes. This doesn't mean you accept abuse or excuse harmful behavior. It means you understand that people act from pain, from fear, from patterns that may not even be theirs to begin with. This view opens a space for compassion without naivety. You don't have to pretend everyone is enlightened. You simply see that suffering runs deep, that no one is acting from a blank slate, that even harmful choices have causes, and if causes can be seen, they can be changed. This is the hope inside dependent origination, not that life will be perfect, but that nothing is permanent, that everything can be shifted with time, care, and awareness. Understanding this doesn't require intellectual mastery, it requires presence. The willingness to ask, what am I responding to right now? Not just on the surface, but underneath. Am I reacting from old fear, from unmet need, from inherited beliefs? These questions are not about self-criticism. They are about clarity. The more you trace the cause, the more space you create for a new response. And in that space, choice returns, not the illusion of control, but the reality of participation. You begin to see that how you respond now becomes part of what arises next. You stop living on autopilot. You begin to shape your life not from fear of the past, but from attention to the present. This is karma not as punishment, but as pattern. And patterns can be transformed. You also begin to see that some turns you thought were detours were actually turns toward truth. You may have lost something you thought you couldn't live without, only to discover a deeper freedom. You may have failed in one plan, only to uncover a more honest path. These aren't stories of redemption, they're stories of unfolding, of causes you couldn't see until they ripened, of paths you couldn't recognize until you walked them. There is no final view. Dependent origination is not a fixed system. It's a living recognition that nothing exists by itself. And because nothing stands alone, everything is open to influence, to care, to change. You are not trapped by your past. You are shaped by it, yes, but you are also reshaping it, right now, with how you meet this breath, this thought, this silence. This understanding can bring immense relief. You stop trying to go back and rewrite your story. You stop punishing yourself for choices made under pressure. You stop holding yourself hostage to who you were. Instead, you begin to relate to your past with tenderness. You start to say, I was doing my best with what I knew, and now I know a little more. This humility becomes strength. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that stays steady in change. You don't cling to being right. You stay open to new information. You let yourself be a student of life, forever learning the shape of causes and their fruits. And through that learning, you suffer less. Not because life becomes easier, but because your mind becomes softer. You stop demanding that your path look impressive or linear. You stop measuring yourself by speed or success. You begin to trust the rhythm of unfolding, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes confusing, sometimes clear, but always arising from something meaningful, nothing wasted, nothing without influence. And perhaps this brings you back to presence, not as escape, but as full participation. You no longer need to chase the ideal life. You meet the life that's here, knowing it's the sum of all that's been and the seed of all that's to come. You meet it with honesty, with care, and with the quiet faith that even your next step, uncertain as it may be, belongs. You don't need to know the full pattern to trust that there is one. You don't need to see the whole web to feel where you're held. You walk, breath by breath, letting each movement be part of something real. Not perfect, not final, but real. And in that realness, your path, every twist, every pause, becomes sacred. Not because it was always right, but because it was always yours. So you stop trying to correct the story. You no longer chase the version of life that never made a mistake. You begin to trust that where you've been is where you were meant to be, not as destiny, but as honest causality. With that understanding, the pressure lifts. You can stop rehearsing the past and start responding to the present. But even in that new awareness, another question arises. What happens when the life you thought was secure starts to fall apart? What if comfort isn't safety at all, but illusion? What if the moment you feel most lost is the moment you're actually stepping out of a trap? This is the truth hidden inside the parable of the burning house. In this classic teaching from the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha tells a story of a grand house, beautiful and large, but quietly engulfed in flames. Inside are children, playing, unaware of the fire spreading around them. They don't want to leave. They are absorbed in games. The father, seeing the danger, calls to them, but they do not understand. They trust the house. They believe they are safe, so he uses skillful means. He tells them there are wonderful toys waiting outside, drawing their attention toward escape. The story is not just about a house. It's about the world we create inside our own minds, the one we believe will hold us, protect us, reward us, until it doesn't. Sometimes what we call stability is just repetition. We stay in places that feel known even when they quietly wear us down. We hold on to relationships, beliefs, jobs, roles, not because they nourish us, but because they're familiar. They give us something to do, someone to be. They make us feel like we know who we are. And then something cracks. A moment, a loss, a shift. Suddenly, the walls start glowing, the air thickens, the illusions burn. You might call it a crisis, but the parable suggests it's also an invitation, not a punishment, not a failure, a moment where illusion shows its cost, a moment where the house is no longer safe. And when that happens, the feeling of being lost is not a problem. It's a step toward freedom. Because to leave the burning house, you must first stop pretending it isn't on fire. This can be disorienting. Everything that once gave your life shape begins to blur. The old goals no longer motivate you. The rewards you chased start to lose their meaning. Even the self-image you built begins to fall apart. But this is not destruction, it's exposure. You are seeing the structure for what it is, not because you've failed, but because you've outgrown it. The burning house is any space where we deny impermanence, where we believe things will always stay the same, that success will last forever, that people won't leave, that time won't change us. We build our lives around these assumptions. We work for them, sacrifice for them, shape our identities around them. But Buddhism teaches that clinging to what cannot last is suffering. And when the fire comes, it's not to harm you, it's to show you what was never real to begin with. Sometimes it's in the fire that you start to breathe differently. The heat makes it impossible to keep pretending. You stop playing the role, you drop the mask, you let go, not because you want to, but because you have to. And suddenly, What once looked like being lost becomes clarity, not of destination, but of truth. That staying would have meant shrinking, that comfort was keeping you small, that the familiar was not the same as safe. The parable also speaks to the way people resist awakening. The children don't want to leave because they don't see the danger. This is how delusion works. It seduces you into believing you have time. That discomfort is normal, that the pain you feel is just part of life. But deep down, you know. You know when something is off. You know when you're making yourself smaller to stay in place. You know when the flame is at the door. Leaving the house is not just physical, it's mental, emotional. It's the courage to walk away from beliefs that no longer serve, from narratives that keep you stuck, from identities that demand too much from your spirit. And yes, that process is lonely. You may not have answers. You may not know where to go next. But the moment you step outside, you realize something crucial. You are no longer pretending. You are no longer invested in illusions. And that alone is a form of freedom. You begin to see that being lost is not an error. It's what happens when the structure collapses, when the script is gone, when your only job is to feel your way forward, slowly, without pretending to know. In this space, the path becomes quieter. You start listening differently, not to advice, not to demands, but to the inner knowing that was buried beneath layers of performance. This is what makes lostness sacred. It's not passive, it's not a void. It's the space where new understanding grows, where you start asking different questions, where you stop chasing the life you thought you should have and begin feeling into the life that's actually possible. And that life often doesn't arrive as a plan. It arrives as presence, as small steps, as honest emotions you finally allow yourself to feel. And still, the temptation to return is strong, to go back into the house, to rebuild the illusion, especially when others are still inside, calling you, inviting you to rejoin the game. This is part of the challenge. To walk your path even when it looks strange, to trust the pull of truth over the promise of comfort, to know that what burns away may be painful, but what remains is real. The parable is also about compassion. The father doesn't yell or force. He uses wisdom, skillful means. He knows what will reach the children's hearts. This teaches us how to guide others, not through control, but through understanding, through meeting people where they are, through helping them see the fire without shame. And sometimes this means being patient, because everyone leaves the house in their own time. You start to realize that your journey out of illusion is not just for you. It helps you see others with more kindness. You remember what it felt like to be inside the burning house, thinking you were fine. So you stop judging. You stop rushing others. You hold space for their process. You speak when they're ready to hear, and when they're not, you stay close, steady, and true to your own path. And as you walk further, the outside world begins to feel different, less urgent, less demanding. You stop needing to define yourself so tightly. You live more loosely, more freely. Not because you have nothing to care about, but because you've stopped pouring energy into illusion. You care about what's real now, what nourishes, what lasts. And what lasts is not certainty, not image, not achievement. What lasts is presence, awareness, integrity. the ability to be with what is, even when it's uncomfortable, the courage to name the truth, even when it costs you something, the grace to let go of stories that no longer match who you are becoming. You begin to notice the gifts that come with loss, the relationships that deepen because you're no longer pretending, the creative spark that returns when you stop numbing, the moments of stillness that no longer feel empty but full of quiet knowing. These are not things you get by staying safe. They arrive when you risk stepping out, and that risk is different for everyone. For some, it's leaving a job. For others, it's telling the truth. For others still, it's sitting still for the first time, letting the fire burn inside instead of avoiding it. But in all these cases, the movement is the same, from illusion toward reality, from false comfort toward honest connection, from fear toward presence. You stop seeing lostness as something to fix. You begin to see it as a signal that something old is gone, that something true is forming, and it may not come all at once. It may be slow, even painful, but you no longer doubt that it matters. You no longer doubt that leaving the burning house, even with nothing in your hands, is an act of deep wisdom. And maybe the most powerful truth is this: even when you felt most alone, most confused, most broken, that was the moment you were stepping into clarity. That was the moment you stopped clinging. That was the moment the illusion began to collapse. You didn't fail. You saw the flame, and you walked out, not into certainty, but into truth, and that will always be enough. You leave the burning house behind. The smoke clears, the silence returns. You're no longer inside illusion, but that doesn't mean the path is free of struggle. In fact, this is often where the deeper work begins. Without the distractions you once clung to, you meet what was always there, unseen, unfaced, quietly shaping your life from within. The discomfort, the fear, the parts of yourself you've been avoiding now step forward. And here, Tibetan Buddhism offers a teaching both fierce and tender. It doesn't tell you to fight these demons, it tells you to welcome them in. This is the story of Milarepa and the practice of radical hospitality toward your own mind. Milarepa, a great Tibetan yogi and poet, lived in deep solitude, committed to spiritual awakening. One day, after long meditation, he returned to his cave to find it filled with demons, wild, terrifying figures. As the story goes, he tried to expel them. He recited mantras, he meditated harder, he invoked compassion, but nothing worked. The demons stayed. It wasn't until he stopped resisting that something changed. He bowed to them. He offered them tea, and then, one by one, they disappeared. This isn't just a metaphor, it's a method. The demons represent your fears, your anger, your shame, your loneliness, the parts of your inner life you don't want to feel. They often show up right when you think you're making progress, right when you finally slow down, when the distractions fall away, when the noise fades. That's when they come, not to destroy you, but to be seen, to be heard, to be met without resistance. Milarepa's approach was not passivity, it was strength through surrender. He didn't invite the demons because he enjoyed suffering. He did it because he understood something most people miss. Whatever you push away gains power. Whatever you turn toward with presence begins to soften. When you meet what scares you with honesty and care, it loses its grip. not because it disappears, but because you're no longer feeding it with fear. This is radical hospitality, not in words, but in practice, sitting with anxiety instead of numbing it, letting anger rise without turning it into violence or shame, listening to grief instead of covering it up with busyness. These acts take courage. They ask you to feel what you've avoided, to welcome the full range of your humanity without trying to fix or control it. In Tibetan Buddhism, demons are not evil beings outside you. They are energetic forms of internal habits, tendencies you've inherited, fed, ignored. They become fierce when they are unacknowledged, but they begin to settle when they are met with open awareness. You don't invite them in to indulge them. You do it to understand them. You offer them tea not to celebrate their arrival, but to stop the war. This doesn't mean letting your emotions take over. It means creating space for them to speak. You learn to sit with the fear and say, "What do you need me to see?" You turn toward the sadness and ask, "What haven't I grieved yet?" You feel the anger and wonder, what boundary was crossed? This way of relating doesn't weaken you, it grounds you. You are no longer tossed around by emotion, you are meeting it with presence. The demons often disguise themselves. They wear different masks: perfectionism, distraction, chronic guilt, self-doubt. You may think they're part of your personality, but they're not. They're old patterns, old defenses, often developed when you had no better tools. Now you do. You have the ability to witness, to create inner space, to welcome the demon not as an enemy, but as a messenger. This process requires deep honesty. You begin to see how much effort goes into keeping up appearances, how much you avoid silence because you know what's waiting inside it. But when you stop running, something begins to heal. The demon loses its shape. What once looked like terror becomes sadness. What once felt like rage becomes pain. And beneath all of it, you find something softer than you expected. You find the original wound, the place where connection was lost, where the heart was hidden, where love was forgotten. And here, your task is not to analyze, it's to stay, to offer the same presence you would give to someone you love. You stop demanding the pain to leave. You listen, and often that listening is all that's needed. The demon fades, the cave becomes quiet again. Milarepa's teaching is not about technique, it's about attitude, an attitude of compassion, even toward your darkest paths. This goes against most instincts. We are taught to silence our flaws, to hide our pain, to overcome our fear by pretending it's not there. But the spiritual path isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming intimate with what is, even the parts you've spent a lifetime rejecting. This intimacy changes your life. It gives you freedom from the exhausting project of self-repair. You start to realize that you don't need to perfect yourself to be at peace. You need to meet yourself fully, without trying to change every uncomfortable feeling, without trying to earn your right to rest. The peace comes not from avoiding demons, but from learning how to sit beside them. And this practice begins to show in the way you treat others. When you've welcomed your own anger, you stop fearing it in others. When you've faced your own grief, you become more patient with someone else's. Your compassion is no longer conceptual, it's embodied. You know what it's like to sit with a trembling heart, and so you become a safe place for others to do the same. But this is slow work. The demons don't always disappear right away. Some visit again and again. They arrive in new forms. They speak with new voices. But now you are no longer afraid. You have tea ready. You have a seat open. You have built a relationship with discomfort that no longer threatens your sense of self. Over time, something unexpected happens. The parts of yourself that once terrified you become sources of wisdom. You realize the demon was pointing to an unmet need, that the fear was guarding a forgotten truth, that the shame was trying to protect a younger version of you. You start to see that these demons were not here to block your path. They were guiding you back to wholeness. This doesn't romanticize suffering. It honors the complexity of healing. You are not weak because you hurt. You are not broken because you carry wounds. You are human. And when you stop pretending otherwise, you become real, not polished, not perfect, but real. And that reality is where compassion begins. Even your darkest thoughts can be held in awareness. They don't need to be acted on. They don't need to be believed. They only need to be seen. With honesty, with courage, with the kind of love that doesn't flinch. This is what it means to invite the demon to tea, to say, "You don't have to go, but you don't control me either." To sit together, to share space, to breathe in silence until the fear dissolves into understanding. And when the demon leaves, you don't need to celebrate. You simply bow. You thank the pain for what it revealed. You thank yourself for staying, and you keep walking. Lighter now, not because you've escaped something, but because you've finally allowed it to rest. This is not easy, but it is possible. And the more you practice, the more trust you build. Not trust that things will always be easy, but trust that you can meet whatever comes, that no feeling is too much, that no fear is too strong, that every part of you has a place at the table. Milarepa's cave is your own inner world, and the demons are already there, waiting not to be destroyed, but to be understood. So you welcome them, one by one, and in that welcoming, you are no longer lost. You are finally home. After learning to sit with your shadows, to pour tea for the parts of yourself that once terrified you, something begins to shift. You are no longer rushing to get rid of discomfort. You no longer need every emotion to resolve itself before you take your next breath. But even so, something in you may still ache for certainty. The habit of needing answers doesn't disappear just because you've made peace with fear. That urge to search, endlessly, tirelessly, can still grip you. And yet, there's another way. Not the way of finding, but of resting. Not in solutions, but in noble silence. This kind of silence is not empty. It is not the absence of effort or thought. It is the stillness that remains when you stop chasing. It doesn't come from giving up. It comes from finally being willing to stay. Not with what you want to feel, but with what is. No answers needed, no progress to prove. Just breath, presence, and the willingness to stop turning away. Noble silence is a phrase rooted in early Buddhist teachings. It describes the kind of quiet that isn't just about being quiet with your mouth, but quiet with your mind. It means not rushing to fill the space with explanations, not scrambling to make meaning where there is mystery, not speaking just to avoid feeling. It is the kind of silence that can only come when you realize that some truths cannot be spoken. They can only be known. In contrast, restless searching wears many disguises. It doesn't always look frantic. Sometimes it shows up as spiritual hunger, the kind that never rests. reading more, trying harder, asking more teachers, asking again, needing to feel that you're always evolving, always making progress, always one step closer to clarity. On the surface, it may look like dedication, but underneath, it's still the same fear. Fear of stopping, fear of sitting still, fear that if you stop searching, you'll be left behind. But the truth is, sometimes the deepest growth happens not through searching, but through staying. When you no longer demand resolution, something softens. You stop pressing your life for answers. You start listening to the silence itself. And what it reveals is not always clear or comfortable, but it is always true. This silence is not a retreat from life. It is a deep engagement with it. It asks you to meet what's here with your whole attention, not just the parts that affirm your path, but the parts that confuse you, the parts that remain unformed, the moments when you feel suspended between identities, between decisions, between beliefs. These moments are not mistakes. They are thresholds. They are the spaces where the old is falling away, but the new hasn't arrived. And silence is what allows you to stand in that space without trying to escape it. Many people fear silence because they think it means nothing is happening, that they're stuck. But silence is rarely empty. It's full of processes you can't see. Roots growing below the surface. Patterns unwinding without your control. You may not feel dramatic change, but that doesn't mean nothing is shifting. It simply means the work is happening in a place beyond your measurement. In this way, noble silence is not passive. It's not laziness or avoidance. It is active, alive, precise. It takes courage to stop seeking long enough to let the truth speak in its own language. The mind may demand answers, but silence does not respond to demands. It waits until you're quiet enough to listen. And when you do, you may start to notice something unexpected. That the insights you were chasing come not through effort, but through stillness. That clarity often appears when you least expect it, not in the middle of analysis, but in the middle of presence. A sudden knowing, a shift in perception, a sense that something inside you has rearranged itself. This is the paradox of noble silence. The less you chase, the more you see. The more you let go of needing to understand, the more understanding arises. It doesn't always explain itself. It doesn't arrive as a full sentence. It arrives as peace, as a felt sense that you are no longer resisting the moment. In silence, you begin to witness the way the mind tries to escape discomfort. You see how it jumps from one thought to another, one fantasy to another, always trying to fill the space. And you begin to recognize that this restlessness is not who you are. It's a habit, one that can be softened, not through force, but through kindness. This kindness becomes your path. You stop forcing yourself to arrive somewhere. You stop using self-help as a way to punish yourself for not being healed. You begin to trust that not knowing can be holy, that questions don't need immediate answers to have value, that your willingness to wait, to sit with what you don't understand, is a form of wisdom. There are times when no teacher can answer your questions, times when no teaching feels clear. This is not because you're off track. It's because something in you is learning how to rest, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You're learning to stop performing for your own expectations, and this rest gives birth to a different kind of insight, one that isn't dramatic or easy to explain. It's the kind of knowing that comes from deep alignment, from living honestly, from showing up for your life without needing it to impress anyone, not even yourself. You realize that chasing spiritual depth can be just another form of ego, another way of proving your worth. But when you stop, when you really stop, you see that the silence itself holds everything you thought you had to earn. Peace, clarity, belonging. It was always there, hidden behind the noise. You also begin to understand that being lost is not a problem to solve. It is a space to honor, a moment where the map falls away so you can learn to walk differently. Being lost means the old path is gone. The identity that kept you safe no longer fits. The destination no longer matters. And in that lostness, something opens, something unstructured but alive. And it is silence that allows it to speak. The restless part of you may still protest. It may say, "Do something, fix this, go somewhere." But you've seen where that road leads. It leads back into the house you already left, into the noise you already chose to quiet. And now you stay, you breathe, you bow to the silence. You let it show you what you were too busy to see. And slowly you discover that this space of no answer is not void, it is presence. It is the place where you no longer have to explain yourself, where you no longer perform healing, where you simply rest in the mystery of being alive, fully, messily, truthfully. This becomes your new practice, not striving, not fixing, just being with what is, learning to trust that the life unfolding through you knows what it's doing, even when you don't. And in that trust, something sacred grows, a relationship with silence that feels like coming home, not to answers, not to roles, but to yourself, unwritten, unmeasured, whole. You stop seeing your silence as empty. You start seeing it as fertile. You know that just beneath the stillness, life is moving. And when it's ready, it will speak. Not in the language of logic, but in the language of truth. Quiet, steady, enough. You sit longer in the silence. At first, it's difficult. Then it's grounding. Eventually, it becomes a kind of knowing without words. You no longer reach for answers like lifelines. You begin to trust stillness as something alive. But even here, questions continue to arise. Not the shallow ones, the deep ones, the ones without obvious form. They don't want solutions. They want your attention. And this is where the teachings of Zen offer something rare, an invitation to stop answering and start listening to the riddle itself. The koan, the unresolvable puzzle that holds the doorway to clarity. In Zen practice, a koan is not meant to be solved. It is not a riddle with a clever answer. It is a challenge to your habitual mind, a crack in the logic you've built your world upon. A question so strange, so seemingly absurd, that it breaks the grip of normal thinking. It might be a phrase, a short dialogue, a paradox. It might make no sense at all. And that's the point. You don't figure it out. You live with it. You let it work on you. What if your confusion is also a koan? What if the way you feel lost is not a mistake, but a living question? One that doesn't need solving, only deep attention. You don't analyze it. You don't rush to escape it. You stay. You hold the feeling as you would a koan, directly, fully, without needing to understand it right away. And something begins to shift. The beauty of a koan is that it cannot be approached through ordinary thought. It takes you beyond concepts. You can't force your way through it. You sit with it, and in time, It begins to open something inside you. It dissolves your usual strategies. It shows you how the mind tries to control experience. And in that soft breaking, space opens. Treating lostness as a koan means you stop demanding clarity on your terms. You stop chasing a version of yourself that has it all figured out. You begin to explore the texture of being without direction. You study its edges, its movement, its emotional weight. You become intimate with not knowing. This intimacy does not make the confusion disappear. It makes it sacred. It turns it into a teacher. You start to see how much of your suffering comes not from the confusion itself, but from your refusal to let it exist. You wanted the map, the answer, the fix, but now you sit in the question, and the question begins to soften you. A koan doesn't explain itself. It reveals through time, through presence. It demands patience. And it teaches that truth is not always what the mind expects. It is often stranger, simpler, deeper. You may not be able to describe what changes, but you feel it. Something that was tight loosens. Something that was closed begins to open. This is not knowledge. This is wisdom born of presence. There's no formula for working with a koan, just as there is no formula for working with your own uncertainty. Each time you return to it, you bring something new, a different breath, a deeper honesty. The koan meets you where you are. It reflects your relationship with yourself, your need to control, your resistance to mystery, and your eventual surrender. This is why lostness, when held this way, becomes transformational. It no longer means failure, it becomes a gate. A narrow one, yes, but one that opens not through effort, but through willingness. You begin to walk differently, not by pushing forward, but by leaning inward, listening more, speaking less, trusting what you feel more than what you can explain. Zen practitioners spend years with the same koan, not to solve it, but to let it shape them, to break down the need for certainty, to build intimacy with the unknown. Your life can be your koan, your heartbreak, your grief, your restlessness. Not problems to fix, but questions to enter, invitations to deeper presence. And this presence changes you. It creates a new kind of intelligence, one that doesn't depend on categories or conclusions, one that moves from silence, from subtlety, from the body. You begin to sense the answer without needing to name it, not a solution, but a shift in how you are. Sometimes clarity arrives in the middle of stillness, not because you finally figured it out, but because you finally stopped running. The question opens like a flower, not through analysis, but through trust. The kind of trust that grows in silence, in persistence, in the willingness to stay. You may find that your old ways of speaking no longer fit, that the words you used to reach for no longer carry the truth. This is part of the shift. Koan practice rewires how you use language. It shows you that words can't always hold what you're learning, and that's okay. You start to speak more carefully, more slowly, sometimes not at all. This quiet becomes a kind of strength, not because you know more, but because you need less certainty, less affirmation, less control. You stop needing your experience to fit someone else's definition of healing or awakening. You let it be what it is, alive, messy, real. and realness becomes more valuable than understanding. You begin to let yourself be confused without shame, to feel broken without needing to be fixed, to ask without needing immediate answers. This doesn't mean giving up. It means finally stepping into the kind of wisdom that holds questions as sacred. You may also find that your compassion grows. When you treat your own confusion with respect, you stop judging others for theirs. You stop trying to give advice where listening is needed. You stop trying to save people from their own questions. You learn to sit with them side by side in the silence, and that silence becomes a gift, not of solutions, but of presence. Lostness becomes a shared human space, one that connects you to others, not separates you. When you can say, "I don't know," and mean it with humility, something opens between you. Trust, softness, the freedom to not perform wisdom, but to walk it slowly, together. This kind of walking brings peace, not the peace of having everything in order, but the peace of no longer needing to hold it all together. You trust the path to reveal itself one step at a time, and when it doesn't, you stay, you breathe, you bow to the question, and let it lead you deeper. Koan practice teaches that the way through is not upward or outward, it's inward, not into a private world of answers, but into the shared mystery of being alive. It brings you back to the moment, to the breath, to the body, not because these are easy, but because they are true. And truth, when met directly, is enough. You are not here to solve yourself, you are here to meet yourself, and in that meeting, your lostness becomes the path. Your question becomes your companion, and your silence becomes your teacher. Sitting with the unanswerable, you begin to realize that not all questions are meant to disappear. Some are meant to accompany you. You carry them not as burdens, but as lanterns, quietly lighting your path as you walk through the fog. This way of being brings a strange comfort, but it also brings a new challenge. When you stop grasping for certainty, another habit can appear, swinging between extremes. On one side, despair, believing nothing matters. On the other, control, believing everything must be fixed. Between these two, the Dharma offers another possibility. Not avoidance, not over-effort, but a middle way. This path asks something deeper than reaction. It calls for balance, not just in action, but in attitude. Not a shallow balance that seeks comfort, but a wise balance that understands the cost of extremes. Despair is heavy. It tells you there's no point in continuing. It whispers that effort is wasted, that nothing will change. It numbs, it isolates, it makes your life feel like a closed loop. And yet, its presence is understandable. When growth feels slow, when pain keeps returning, when clarity stays just out of reach, despair can feel honest. Control is just as heavy, though it hides beneath effort. It looks like motivation, discipline, focus. But beneath it, there's fear, a refusal to allow uncertainty, a constant tweaking of the self. Always reading more, meditating more, correcting more, trying to manage every mood, every thought, every outcome. It wears the mask of progress, but it often comes from the same place as despair, the fear that you are not enough as you are. The middle way is not a compromise. It's not 50% effort and 50% surrender. It's a shift in how you relate to both. It sees that life includes effort, and it also includes letting go. It sees that not all pain must be solved, and not all growth comes from pushing. The middle way is alive. It moves, it adjusts, it responds to each moment instead of reacting from habit. To live this way means noticing your patterns without punishing them. When you lean toward despair, you don't have to argue with it. You recognize its voice, you feel its weight, but you don't let it decide your next move. You breathe, and you remember that just because the future is unclear doesn't mean it's hopeless. You do one small thing that keeps the door open. That could be rest. That could be asking for help. That could be making tea. The point is, you don't let despair close your life. When you lean toward control, you also pause. You notice the tension in your body, the urgency in your thoughts. You ask, what am I afraid will happen if I stop trying so hard? You listen to the answer, and often it's something tender, a fear of being unloved, unworthy, unseen. Control is not the enemy. It's a reaction to pain, but it cannot heal the pain it's trying to avoid. The middle way honors the truth of suffering without making it your identity. It allows space for joy without demanding that joy prove anything. It lets you care deeply without needing to manage the outcome. This balance is not static. It's felt. Sometimes you'll lean a little too far in one direction. That's okay. Balance is not about perfection. It's about returning. Spiritual bypassing happens when you use teachings to avoid feeling. You say everything is impermanent, so you don't grieve. You say everything is perfect, so you ignore injustice. You call something karma, so you don't look at your own part. These statements may have truth in them, but when used to bypass, they cut you off from the human experience they are meant to illuminate. The middle way doesn't deny impermanence. It lets you feel the pain of loss while knowing it will pass. It doesn't demand emotional neutrality. It allows heartbreak to be fully present without defining you. Obsessive self-fixing happens when you make yourself a constant project. When every thought must be purified, every emotion tracked, every mistake analyzed. Growth becomes pressure, practice becomes performance, and stillness becomes something you never quite reach. The middle way sees the value of effort, but it knows that real change doesn't come from self-punishment. It comes from care, from clarity, from consistency without cruelty. This balance allows for healing. It makes room for your contradictions. You are not always wise. You are not always kind. But you are here, showing up, learning, and that is enough. The middle way does not ask for a perfect self. It asks for presence. It trusts that presence itself is what changes you over time. Living this way means holding space for complexity. You can believe in growth and still feel tired. You can know things are working and still cry when it's hard. You can feel peace and still make mistakes. Nothing has to cancel anything else. The middle way doesn't force either or. It holds both and. This path also transforms how you support others. You stop trying to fix their sadness with advice. You stop rushing them toward acceptance before they've had time to feel their grief. You begin to trust that their process, like yours, has its own rhythm. You walk beside them, not in front. You offer listening instead of lessons. And often, that's what truly helps. In your own life, this balance becomes a daily rhythm. You notice when you're pushing too hard. You notice when you've stopped trying at all. You adjust, you rest, you act, You reflect. You ask for feedback. You turn inward. You reconnect. You allow rest without shame. You allow action without needing it to be perfect. Slowly, the middle way becomes not just a concept, but a living relationship with life. This relationship deepens your self-trust. You stop fearing every setback. You start seeing your patterns without panic. You know that confusion is not failure, it's part of the path. That relapse doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're human. And that insight doesn't mean you're done, it means you're evolving. You stop needing to constantly prove your worth. The middle way shows you that worth isn't something you earn, it's something you remember. And every time you return to presence, to balance, to care, that memory becomes stronger. Even your spiritual practice changes. It becomes less about reaching some final state and more about being with yourself exactly as you are. Meditation is not about escaping thoughts, but about meeting them. Ritual is not about control, but about connection. Study is not about gathering knowledge, but about deepening wisdom. And life itself becomes the practice, each moment an invitation to return to balance. You start to notice that peace isn't somewhere else. It's in how you meet what's here, not in a forced calm, but in a grounded flexibility, in the willingness to change without force, to rest without guilt, to act without panic, to feel without collapse. This path honors your full humanity. It gives you room to breathe, to learn, to fall, to return. Not because you failed, but because that's the way forward. Despair will still visit, control will still whisper, but you no longer build your life around either. You let them speak, you listen, and then you return, not to perfection, not to clarity, but to balance. This is the heart of the middle way. Not control, not collapse, but a quiet steadiness that holds both and keeps walking. You begin to understand that balance is not about always feeling steady. It's about knowing how to return when life throws you off. Some days the return is gentle, other days it's full of resistance. But each time you come back to the middle, even briefly, you rebuild trust. Still, one part of your mind may keep clinging to something solid, some ground to stand on that will not move. The part that still asks, what can I hold on to so I never lose my way again? And this is where the Dharma points to a deeper truth. The answer isn't in what stays, it's in what passes, not in permanence, but in impermanence. This is where we begin to see anicca not as a loss, but as refuge. At first, impermanence feels cruel. You grow and it fades. You love and it ends. You find clarity and it slips away. It can seem like nothing is safe, nothing will last, nothing will stay whole. But as your perspective softens, you start to see that the very nature of change is also what makes freedom possible. If nothing stayed the same forever, then neither will your pain, neither will confusion, neither will this sense of being stuck. That which arises must also pass, and this truth, when deeply understood, becomes a comfort like no other. Impermanence is not just a law of the universe, it is a doorway to release. It means no feeling defines you, no experience traps you, no identity is final. The moment you realize everything is changing, you stop expecting life to hold still for you, and this opens space not for despair, but for peace. Often the suffering comes not from what's happening, but from your need for it to stay the same, or your fear that it won't. You want happiness to last. You want grief to end quickly. You want to know where you're going, and you want it to unfold exactly as planned. But when you live this way, you're constantly disappointed, because the truth of life is movement, and the more you resist it, the more it hurts. Accepting impermanence isn't about liking change, it's about seeing the cost of clinging. When you hold too tightly to a version of yourself, you make it harder to grow. When you try to preserve a relationship exactly as it was, you miss what it could become. When you grip a belief out of fear, you stop learning. Change is not the enemy, it is the current that carries everything forward. This current is not chaotic, it has its own rhythm. Seasons turn, moods shift, thoughts rise and fall. Nothing stays static, and this is not a problem. It is life's way of renewing itself. You don't need to stop the movement. You need to learn how to move with it, to listen for what's asking to be released, to feel what's no longer alive, and to trust that letting go is not loss, it's alignment. In Buddhist practice, watching impermanence becomes a way to train the heart. You observe how each breath comes and goes, how sensations appear and disappear, how joy arises and then fades. This isn't meant to make you detached. It's meant to help you see reality more clearly, because the clearer your vision, the less you suffer when things shift, and the more you can appreciate what's here while it's here. This appreciation deepens when you stop taking things for granted. When you realize nothing is guaranteed, you stop waiting to be grateful. You stop assuming you'll have another chance. You speak the words now. You make the change now. You love without delay, not because you're afraid, but because you've seen how precious each moment really is. Impermanence also transforms your relationship with goals. You may still dream, still work towards something, but you stop tying your worth to the outcome. You begin to see the value of the path itself, the way it opens you, teaches you, reveals parts of you you didn't know were there. The result may come, it may not, but either way, you've lived. This teaching doesn't make you passive, it gives you permission to move with more freedom. You stop resisting endings. You stop fearing the unknown. You allow people to change. You allow yourself to change. And in doing so, you become more available to the present, not locked in the past, not obsessed with the future, but here, responsive, alive, open. When you experience deep pain, the truth of impermanence becomes vital, because even the heaviest emotions shift. No grief is frozen, no fear is permanent. The process may be slow, uneven, unpredictable, but the truth remains, everything moves. When you remember this, you gain the strength to sit through what you once thought would break you. This also changes how you relate to pleasure. You don't cling to it. You don't try to stretch it beyond its natural life. You feel it fully, knowing it will pass. And this makes it more beautiful, more honest. You stop turning joy into a contract. You meet it like a guest, welcome, precious, temporary. And when it leaves, you don't collapse. You bow. Even your sense of direction is not immune to change. You may think you know where you're going, but life reveals new layers, unexpected openings, sudden shifts. What seemed clear yesterday may blur today. This isn't failure, it's unfolding, and when you allow your path to be organic, you become more resilient. You stop demanding consistency. You start trusting adaptability. This adaptability doesn't mean you give up on discipline or vision. It means you hold them lightly. You recognize when something no longer fits. You make space for new insight. You evolve. This is the gift of impermanence. It keeps you honest. It brings you back to humility. It reminds you that you don't have to have it all figured out. You also learn to grieve more gently. Loss doesn't surprise you the same way. It still hurts, but you understand it as part of the flow, a part of the fabric. You don't harden around it. You soften. You feel what needs to be felt. You cry, you remember, you honor, and then you keep living. Not despite the change, but because of it. This rhythm becomes familiar. Not always easy, but familiar. You no longer panic when things dissolve. You've seen it before. You know how to breathe through it, how to wait without closing, how to watch the next form rise from the one that has ended. You become patient, not passive, but steady. And in that steadiness, your fear begins to shrink, not because you've conquered it, but because you've walked with it enough to know it doesn't define you. You've watched it come and go, like everything else. And that's the deepest comfort of all, when you fully see that everything changes, including your fear, your confusion, your longing. You begin to trust the movement. You begin to bow to the uncertainty, not as a threat, but as a teacher, as a companion, as a path. Anicca is not something to believe in. It's something to witness, again and again, until the mind stops fighting, until the heart begins to open, until the body relaxes into the truth that nothing is stuck, not even you. So you keep walking, you keep breathing, you let things come and go, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And in what is real, you are already held. You begin to feel the rhythm of change in your bones. You stop resisting it as a threat and start welcoming it as a sign that life is still flowing. You no longer need to hold on so tightly to what was or what might be. Even the parts of you once thought were unchangeable, the roles, the emotions, the identity you worked so hard to build, start to feel softer. Not wrong, just less solid. And here, something profound comes into view. Maybe the reason you felt lost all along is because you've been searching for something that doesn't actually exist in the way you thought it did. Maybe what's been missing is the idea of you. This is the doorway into the teaching of anatta, non-self, a concept that shakes the foundation of everything the ego believes to be true. In Western thinking, the self is often treated as a fixed thing, a personality to find, a core identity to strengthen, a version of yourself to align with. But the Buddha taught something radically different, that what we call a self is not a thing at all. It's a process, a collection of thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, and experiences, ever changing, ever moving, never standing still long enough to be permanent. This teaching is not abstract philosophy. It's deeply practical, because much of your suffering comes from the belief that there is a fixed you who must always be clear, always be progressing, always be certain. When you can't meet that standard, you panic. You say you're lost. You think something is wrong with you. But what if nothing is wrong? What if the very idea of a solid, consistent you is the illusion? You don't need to find yourself. You need to stop clinging to the version of yourself you've been told to maintain. The one built on approval, performance, and control. The one shaped by comparison and fear. The one that says you must always know who you are. That version was never stable to begin with, and now, as it begins to dissolve, What you're experiencing isn't failure, it's freedom. The freedom of anatta is not about erasing your uniqueness. It's about releasing the pressure to turn that uniqueness into a rigid structure. You can still feel preferences, experience emotions, have memories and dreams, but you stop identifying with them as permanent. You see them as arising conditions, shaped by causes, changing moment by moment. You can be angry without being an angry person. You can feel lost without being a lost person. The label doesn't stick because you no longer glue it to an imagined core. This shift brings lightness. You begin to hold yourself more gently. You don't force consistency where there is none. You allow your humanity to be dynamic. You stop saying, "This is just how I am," and start asking, "What is arising now?" Your identity becomes less of a cage and more of a mirror, something that reflects what's here, not something that defines what must be. This new relationship with identity also changes how you see others. When you stop clinging to your own self-image, you stop needing other people to confirm it. You stop judging them for their inconsistencies. You stop expecting them to stay the same. You allow change. You allow contradiction. You allow people to be more than the labels you once gave them. It's not that nothing matters. It's that things matter differently. You become more interested in awareness than in being right. You start to watch the mind as it moves, how it clings, how it defends, how it fears being nobody. That fear is strong, but it's also the gateway. Because beyond the fear of not having a fixed self lies the peace of not needing one. You begin to notice how often your thoughts refer back to I and me. You watch how quickly the ego inserts itself into everything. I'm doing this well. I failed. I need to be better. I'm not good enough. I deserve more. And when you look closely, you see that I is often just a placeholder, a shortcut the mind uses to tell its stories. But if you stop and examine it, there's nothing solid underneath. Just awareness. Just movement. This doesn't make you disappear. It makes you real. Not as a defined object, but as a living experience. You become more like weather, changing skies, shifting winds. No need to be the same from one moment to the next. And this makes you flexible. It makes you humble. It makes you free. The teaching of non-self also dissolves the pressure to arrive. You stop trying to become someone once and for all. You understand that life is not a project to complete. It's a dance, an unfolding, a series of moments in which you participate but don't control. You are not the fixed center. You are the field in which it all appears. And this recognition, rather than diminishing you, expands your sense of self until it becomes boundless. Meditation helps you see this. You sit and you observe the rising and falling of thoughts. You notice that the thought says, "I am meditating," but the awareness itself has no I. It's just aware. It doesn't cling to the idea of self. It simply sees. And in that seeing, the story of me begins to quiet. You realize that even without thinking about who you are, you still exist. You still breathe. You still feel. Presence does not need identity to be whole. This experience may feel strange at first. The ego doesn't want to be left behind. It wants to reassert itself. It will try to tell you that letting go of self means giving up. But the deeper you go, the more you realize the opposite is true. Letting go of self means you stop fighting. You stop resisting the natural flow of your own becoming. You stop trying to control what was never solid to begin with. This changes your relationship with confusion. When there is no fixed self to protect, being confused doesn't feel like failure. It feels like a natural part of learning. You don't panic when the ground shifts beneath you. You know there was never ground to stand on in the first place, only movement, only unfolding. And so you move with it. This also reshapes your relationship with purpose. You stop needing one defining mission. You stop asking, "What am I meant to do?" and start asking, "What is most alive in me right now?" You stop trying to turn your life into a single storyline. You let it be a collection of chapters, each with its own tone, its own growth, its own letting go. You begin to walk through life with less armor, less defense. You don't need to perform an identity anymore. You don't need to prove that you're consistent or successful or enlightened. You can just be here, responding to what's real, letting your presence speak louder than your story. This doesn't mean passivity. You still act, you still speak, you still take care of things, but your actions are rooted in awareness, not ego. They arise from connection, not performance, and they leave less residue, less pride, less regret. Just the simple rhythm of doing what needs to be done and letting go. Even emotions become easier to hold. You don't cling to being a happy person or a calm person. You feel what arises, you meet it, and you let it pass. You stop turning everything into a reflection of your worth. You are no longer measured by the highs and lows. You are the sky beneath them. And this spaciousness grows. It begins to inform your relationships, your creativity, your sense of time. You feel less rushed, less reactive, less trapped by roles. You are not here to be someone. You are here to be awake, and that is more than enough. The idea of finding yourself begins to feel less urgent, less interesting. You realize you were never missing. You were just mistaking the costume for the character, the voice for the awareness, the story for the truth. Now you rest more often in the background, not checked out, but deeply attuned, aware of what is changing, aware of what is moving, not needing to make it personal, not needing to be somebody special, just here, breathing, being. That is the liberation anatta points to. You are not lost. You are just no longer chasing what was never real. And in the quiet where that chase ends, you finally arrive. You start letting go of the idea that you must find yourself to feel whole. The more you release the pressure to be a fixed someone, the more you can simply be present with what is. But even in this openness, discomfort still arises, pain still visits. The absence of identity does not mean the absence of suffering. And yet now, you meet it differently. You no longer assume that pain means something is broken. You no longer treat it as a sign you've failed. You begin to wonder, what if suffering isn't your enemy at all? What if it's trying to show you something you've been unwilling to see? This is the truth behind dukkha. Not punishment, not defect, but guidance. In the earliest Buddhist teachings, dukkha is the first truth, not because life is all misery, but because suffering is unavoidable. Birth involves struggle. Aging brings loss. Clinging leads to pain. But the Buddha did not teach this to make you feel hopeless. He taught it because acknowledging dukkha is the beginning of wisdom. When you stop avoiding it, it becomes a compass. It points not to what's wrong with you, but to where attention is needed. It's a feedback system, subtle, precise, deeply intelligent. Most of the time, pain gets buried under reaction. You feel sadness and immediately ask how to get rid of it. You feel anxious, and your first impulse is to distract. You feel shame and try to outrun it with performance. But suffering, when met with awareness, holds valuable information. It doesn't just arrive, it carries messages. It shows you where you've been ignoring your truth, where you're trying to be someone you're not, where you're resisting the natural movement of your life. This is why numbing rarely works. You might silence the symptoms, but the signal remains. The more you turn away, the louder it becomes. And not because life is cruel, but because life wants to get your attention. When you hurt, it's not to shame you, it's to direct you. It's a call inward, a reminder to look closer, to listen better, to soften instead of brace. The ego sees suffering as failure, but the Dharma sees it as doorway. Not the one you would choose, but the one that reveals the truth. Pain strips away illusion. It humbles your mind. It brings you face to face with the impermanence of all things. And if you let it, it will also bring you into deeper presence. Because when you stop running, even for a moment, you begin to feel what you've been missing, not just the pain, but the tenderness beneath it. Dukkha also arises from craving, from the belief that things should be different than they are, that you should be somewhere else, someone else, further along. This gap between what is and what should be is where much suffering grows. The middle way does not eliminate desire, but it invites you to question your relationship with it. Are you clinging? Are you forcing? Are you using desire to avoid discomfort? Suffering shows you where you're out of alignment, not with some fixed idea of perfection, but with your own inner integrity. Sometimes suffering is subtle, a low hum of restlessness, a vague sense of dissatisfaction, a constant reaching for something else. This is also dukkha. It's the discomfort of being disconnected from what's real, of not living fully in the present, of letting your life pass while your mind chases what's next. Recognizing this kind of suffering takes honesty, but once you see it, you can begin to return, to breathe, to feel, to be here. At other times, suffering is sharp. Grief, betrayal, loss, fear. These experiences can feel overwhelming, but even here, dukkha is not punishment. It is the natural response to change, to attachment, to the unraveling of what you thought would last. Pain does not mean you're broken. It means you cared, you hoped, you were human. And within that pain is a depth that can transform you if you allow it. Meeting suffering with presence does not mean wallowing in it. It means honoring it as part of the path. It means letting it speak without letting it define you. It means learning to sit with what hurts without needing it to disappear right away. In that space, something begins to shift. You realize you can survive the pain, that it moves, that it's not who you are. It's something passing through. Over time, this changes how you live. You stop needing to protect yourself from every discomfort. You become less reactive, less afraid of hard feelings. You meet each one as a visitor, not as a verdict. And this allows your nervous system to soften, your heart to open, your awareness to widen. You become more stable, not because pain no longer visits, but because you no longer collapse under it. This perspective also transforms how you support others. You stop trying to rescue them from their pain. You listen more. You trust their process. You stop needing to fix everything and start learning how to be with. Your presence becomes healing, not because you make their suffering disappear, but because you don't run from it. Understanding dukkha as a compass also makes your spiritual practice more honest. You stop trying to use meditation or mindfulness to escape pain. You stop chasing bliss as the only sign of progress. You sit with what's real. You learn to feel boredom, frustration, sadness, and still stay present. Still breathe. Still rest in awareness. This is where true depth comes from, not from comfort, but from intimacy with the full range of life. You begin to recognize the patterns that create unnecessary suffering, the perfectionism that keeps you tense, the self-criticism that never lets you rest, the comparison that erodes your confidence. These habits were once protective. Now they are heavy, and dukkha points you toward their weight, not to shame you, but to invite release. Release comes through understanding, not suppression. You investigate with curiosity. Where does this tension live in the body? What thought is underneath it? What fear is unspoken? You stay with the discomfort long enough to see it clearly, and once it's seen, it begins to loosen. Insight arises, not because you forced it, but because you stayed. You also learn to make peace with what you cannot fix. Some suffering is part of being alive. No teaching removes it completely. But when you stop resisting it, it becomes more manageable, more compassionate. You realize you can feel deeply without drowning. You can hurt and still act with integrity. You can lose and still be whole. Suffering, when held wisely, becomes teacher, mirror, and guide. It teaches you where you've abandoned yourself. It mirrors the parts of you that still long for healing. It guides you toward presence by showing you where you've left it. It humbles you, refines you, and softens your edges until what remains is true. This truth isn't abstract, it's embodied. You walk differently. You listen differently. You stop needing everything to be smooth. You start appreciating the texture of life, the cracks, the shadows, the beauty that arises when you no longer run. Even your definition of happiness begins to change. It becomes less about pleasure and more about depth. Less about escape and more about connection. When you welcome dukkha as feedback, you stop fearing your emotions. You start to trust them, not because they are always correct, but because they are always meaningful. They are signals, invitations, openings. Even in their messiness, they carry wisdom. And as you move forward, you begin to thank your pain. Not because it felt good, but because it woke you up. It pointed you back to the parts of yourself you forgot. It showed you what mattered. It taught you how to stay. You stop needing life to be easy. You ask instead that it be real. You stop asking for comfort alone. You ask to be present, to be honest, to be free, not from pain, but within it. And in that freedom, you no longer see suffering as the end. You see it as a sign, a turning point, a quiet invitation to return to what matters. And this time you answer, with presence, with breath, with a heart open enough to feel it all. After allowing suffering to guide you instead of defeating you, something begins to change. You no longer brace against difficulty. You listen. You feel. You let pain point you back toward what matters. But once you've learned to sit with discomfort, a deeper question often appears. If I no longer need to chase comfort or escape pain, how do I move forward? If there's no fixed identity, no solid ground, no final answer, how do I walk through life? This is where the teachings of the Thai forest tradition offer their quiet wisdom. They remind us, sometimes the path is not a straight line. Sometimes we find the deepest clarity by wandering. The forest monks of Thailand live this truth, not as theory, but as practice. They don't hide from the world, but step into the wilderness with no map. They take the teachings into the forest, into solitude, into the unknown, not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. They walk without plans, trusting that the journey itself will shape the understanding. They let nature become their teacher, not through explanations, but through silence, through rhythm, through simplicity. Their lives show that wandering doesn't mean being lost. It can mean listening more deeply than ever before. This way of practice is rooted in renunciation, but not of joy. It's a renunciation of distraction, of excess, of the false security that comes from controlling every detail. When you strip away what is not essential, what remains is direct contact with life, with breath, with hunger, with the sound of insects at night, with the uncertainty of weather, with your own mind, unguarded and unfiltered. And in that rawness, something ancient wakes up, a kind of knowing that doesn't need to be spoken. The wandering monks teach us that stillness and movement are not opposites. You can be in constant motion and still be centered. You can be without a home and still be grounded. The path is not always about arriving. Sometimes it's about becoming attuned to each step. Each footfall becomes part of the meditation. Each encounter, a mirror. Each moment of discomfort, a lesson. This form of wandering demands presence. When you don't know where you'll sleep tonight, you pay attention to what's here now. When your belongings fit into a single bag, your priorities shift. You learn to need less, to carry less, to think less, and in that lightness, you find space for something deeper than convenience. You find space for the truth. The Thai forest masters, like Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Mun, didn't teach by giving fixed answers. They lived the questions. They spoke of training the mind the way one trains the body, through repetition, patience, simplicity. Their teachings were direct, rooted in experience. Not abstract ideas, but living insights that came from walking, observing, sitting, and returning again and again to the breath. These monks show that practice is not confined to a cushion. It's in how you walk, how you eat, how you respond to difficulty. Wandering doesn't mean aimlessness. It means carrying your intention with you wherever you go. It means letting your commitment to awareness travel with you through the forest, through the heat, through hunger, through loneliness. Every part of the journey becomes part of the path. This way of moving through life invites a different relationship with uncertainty. When you no longer need to know what comes next, you become more available to what is. The forest monks don't demand clarity before they begin walking. They walk, and the clarity comes through the walking. You can live this way too, not needing to solve everything, trusting that staying present, even in confusion, is its own kind of purpose. The forest teaches this through contrast. You feel the sharpness of discomfort. You feel the peace of still mornings. You learn from cold nights and aching feet, from the simplicity of a bowl of rice, from the echo of your thoughts in the absence of distraction. The forest mirrors your mind. If you are scattered, it reflects that back to you. If you are calm, it holds you. It doesn't flatter, it reveals. And this revealing is the gift. Because what gets uncovered is not always pretty, but it's true. You see your fear, your pride, your craving. You see how easily the mind jumps, resists, clings. But you also see what is beneath all of that. The part of you that watches, that breathes, that doesn't need fixing, that is simply aware. This kind of wandering doesn't only happen in forests, it happens in the inner life. When you step away from your normal routine, when you enter unfamiliar emotional landscapes, when you stop clinging to what's familiar, you can walk through your day like a monk walks through the trees, alert, present, unburdened by expectation. Your home becomes a forest when you approach it with awareness. The discipline of this path is quiet. It's in not rushing, in not grabbing for stimulation, in not filling the silence with noise. It asks you to befriend slowness, to welcome pauses, to let your mind settle not through force but through repetition, through returning again and again to this step, this breath, this moment. In a world that rewards speed and results, this can feel radical, to walk without striving, to move without urgency, to trust that presence is more powerful than achievement. But the forest monks show it's possible. They remind us that what we most deeply need is already within us. We don't have to acquire it. We have to uncover it. And the uncovering often happens when we stop trying so hard to get somewhere. This doesn't mean you let go of goals or responsibilities. It means you hold them differently. You let your effort arise from clarity, not compulsion. You trust that wandering can be purposeful, not because you know where it leads, but because you know how to walk it with sincerity, with awareness, with a heart that's willing to feel the path beneath your feet. You begin to see wandering as sacred, not in spite of its uncertainty, but because of it. You no longer see your questions as obstacles. They become companions. The forest tradition teaches that clarity is not a place you reach. It's something that dawns slowly through the act of returning, not once, many times. And with each return, something quiet and true strengthens inside you. You begin to let go of needing the journey to impress anyone. You stop needing your progress to look a certain way. You let it be quiet, uneven. You trust the rhythm of your own unfolding. You learn to bow not only to the moments of insight, but to the long stretches of not knowing. These too are holy. And when you do this, you begin to feel the deeper safety that comes from not being defined by destination, the safety of being rooted in presence, the stability of knowing that you don't need to hold everything together to keep walking. You just need to stay close to your intention, to keep listening, to let life keep teaching you through every detour, every silence, every small opening that appears when you're not forcing one. Wandering with purpose means you don't need to explain your path to others. You just need to keep walking it. You don't need constant results. You just need honesty. And the forest tradition holds this honesty with gentleness. It says, walk slowly, breathe deeply, let the path reveal itself. Even when the world is loud, you can still return to this quiet way, not by leaving everything behind, but by remembering that the practice is already with you, in your breath, in your step, in your willingness to stop running from your own heart. And so you walk, not to escape, but to arrive again and again where you already are. Wandering with presence teaches you that clarity doesn't always come from movement. Often, the most honest insights arise when the world stops spinning, when your effort pauses and you meet the stillness beneath it all. But even after walking without destination, even after bowing to each moment with patience, you may still long for a deeper kind of seeing, a vision that is not imagined but known. This is where another kind of path opens, not one of doing, but of settling. When the mind is no longer stirred, when the agitation begins to fade, what was always there starts to show itself. This is the power of insight meditation, the quiet clarity that arrives not by force, but by letting the mud settle. In the Buddhist tradition, the practice of insight, or vipassana, is not about controlling your thoughts. It is about learning how to observe them without clinging or resisting. When you sit with the mind just as it is, not trying to shape it into something else, the deeper layers begin to reveal themselves. You don't chase answers. You stop evaluating your progress. You begin to witness the patterns of your thinking, your emotional habits, your subtle reactions, and through that witnessing, a natural clarity begins to emerge. This clarity is not created, it's uncovered. Like a glass of water clouded with dirt, the mind does not need more effort, it needs stillness. Each time you come back to the breath, each time you return to the body, you give the particles of confusion space to settle. Not because you willed it into peace, but because you stopped stirring it. Insight doesn't mean suddenly having all the answers. It means seeing things as they are, without distortion. This includes seeing impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self, not just as ideas, but as living truths that appear directly through attention. These insights don't arrive through analysis. They arise through clear seeing, the kind of seeing that happens only when you're still enough to notice what you usually miss. In moments of feeling lost, the mind tends to react. It grasps at solutions. It loops through doubt. It scans for exit routes. But insight meditation offers a different approach. It invites you to stop resisting the lostness and start observing it, not as a problem, but as a sensation, as a collection of thoughts and feelings arising and passing. You notice how your confusion expands when you believe every thought. You notice how it softens when you just let the thought float by. This noticing changes everything. You begin to see that much of your suffering is optional. That pain may be real, but the story around it, the pressure, the comparison, the judgment, is often something you're adding, not on purpose, but out of habit. And once you see this, you have a choice. You don't need to fight the thought. You just stop feeding it. You let it drift. You return to the breath. You watch the ripples fade. The practice is simple, but not easy. It asks you to sit still in a world that tells you movement is the solution. It asks you to feel boredom, restlessness, fear, not to fix them, but to meet them. And this is where real transformation begins. not by solving your life like a puzzle, but by learning how to be with your life as it is. You begin to notice the subtler movements of the mind, the way you resist discomfort, the way you crave resolution, the way you judge yourself for not being further along. These mental movements keep the mud stirred, but when you meet them with awareness, noticing them, naming them, letting them pass, you start to find space. And in that space, a different kind of wisdom arises, one that doesn't shout, one that doesn't argue, one that simply sees. You see how quickly your thoughts shift, how sensations arise and fade, how the story of "I am lost" is just another thought, and not a very reliable one. You see that behind the story is something quieter, a steady awareness, a stillness that does not need anything to change in order to be at peace. This awareness doesn't belong to anyone. It isn't personal. It's not a possession. It's what you are when you stop performing, when you stop reaching, when you simply sit. The more you rest in this space, the less you need your confusion to resolve. You don't need to arrive somewhere. You are already here. Insight meditation trains you to return to this moment, not just during formal practice, but throughout your day. You begin to carry the stillness with you. You walk with more awareness. You listen more deeply. You notice your reactions before they harden into habits. You respond with more care, more clarity, not because you forced yourself to be calm, but because the mud is no longer in your eyes. The deeper your practice, the more you begin to see the nature of thoughts themselves. You see that they are not problems to solve. They are events to witness. They arise from causes. They play out, and they dissolve. When you stop clinging to them, they lose their power. You begin to sense the difference between awareness and content, between the sky and the clouds, between you and the passing weather. Even strong emotions, grief, anger, shame, begin to feel different. They don't go away, but they lose their solidity. You feel them fully, but you are not drowned in them. You watch them rise, crest, and fall. You stop identifying with them. You learn to stay with the wave, trusting that it will return to stillness. The wave is not the ocean. This is the essence of letting the mud settle. You're not waiting for a perfect mind. You're learning to stop interfering with it, to stop spinning stories, to stop reacting to every thought as if it were true. You learn to pause, to breathe, to look with clarity, and not take everything so personally. This clarity changes how you relate to confusion. You stop needing it to go away. You become interested in it. You ask, what does this feel like in the body? What thought keeps looping? What belief am I holding right now? And even if the answers don't come, you stay, you watch, and in the watching, the grip loosens. Insight arises when you're not chasing it, when you're still enough to let it come to you. It may arrive as a small shift, a subtle recognition, a sense of spaciousness where there was once contraction. You don't hold on to it, you bow to it, and then you return to the practice. And the practice continues, breath by breath, moment by moment, not seeking breakthrough, but honoring presence. You trust that each return deepens your capacity to see clearly, that each moment of stillness helps settle the layers of confusion, that even if you don't feel clarity now, it is forming below the surface. Insight. Meditation is not a quick fix. It's a path of patience, of humility, of returning again and again to what is real. The lostness does not disappear overnight, but over time it stops frightening you. It stops defining you. It becomes another experience, held in awareness, resting in the quiet that was always underneath. And in that quiet, you see what you were never meant to force. You feel what you once tried to outrun. You become the stillness that lets it all unfold, and in that stillness, you finally see. So here you are, still, breathing, after everything. After wandering through the forests of doubt, the silence of not knowing, the fire of letting go, you're still here. And maybe that's the most important truth of all. You never needed to have it all figured out. You just needed to stop running from the questions. You've now seen that feeling lost isn't a flaw, it's a path. The beginner's mind is fertile. Confusion is a koan. Suffering is not punishment, but a compass. Emptiness isn't void, it's space. Every piece you thought was falling apart was actually falling into place, not because you controlled it, but because you allowed it. You let the mud settle. You stepped out of the burning house. You welcomed your demons. You trusted the silence. You let the old identity dissolve. And in that sacred unraveling, you touched something real. So, if you're lying there now, still unsure, still open, still breathing, that's enough. That's everything. You're not broken. You're becoming. And when you're ready, share something below. Not to prove anything, but to mark your presence. Maybe one word, maybe one sentence. What part of this teaching stayed with you? What did you feel? Let that comment be your own kind of breadcrumb for someone else who feels lost and might see themselves in your voice. And if you want more journeys like this, more teachings that hold you gently while helping you see clearly, subscribe. This space is for you, for your breath, your becoming, your quiet return. Now sleep well. Let the teachings carry you. You're already home.